The evening was shimmering with opulence. Clara's mansion, perched high on the cliffs overlooking the city, was bathed in golden lights that reflected off the polished marble floors. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings like stars caught in a web of glass. The scent of freshly bloomed roses filled the air as the rich and famous mingled, laughing, sipping champagne, and enjoying the grandeur of the evening. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Clara stood in the center of it all, the queen of the night. At 28, she had already carved a name for herself as one of the wealthiest and most influential women in Silicon Valley. Everything she touched turned to gold, and her life was a perfect balance of luxury and power. But tonight, something was different. Something felt off. As her guests chatted and enjoyed their drinks, Clara's eyes landed on an unexpected presence in the room. Elon Musk, the one and only, the man who had revolutionized technology and space exploration. And yet, Clara couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement and curiosity bubbling inside her. She had never met him before, but his reputation, his genius, his sheer presence, it intrigued her. Elon was standing by the grand piano, casually observing the room, his usual confident demeanor intact. But there was something about him tonight that made Clara want to shake things up. She sauntered over to him, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Elon," she said with a playful smile, "you know, I've heard you're good at a lot of things, but I've never heard of you playing the piano. What do you say? Dare to try?" Elon raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "The piano?" he repeated, his voice smooth but tinged with uncertainty. "I don't think anyone wants to hear me play." Clara's lips curved into a mischievous smile. "Oh, I'm sure they'd love to hear you. Besides, it's just a little fun, right? No harm in showing off a hidden talent." The guests around them started to gather, sensing the challenge in the air. Whispers spread like wildfire across the room. Clara wasn't just known for her beauty and wealth. She was also notorious for her love of making people uncomfortable. This was her territory, and Elon Musk was about to be her next target. Elon chuckled softly. "You sure about this? I've never played in front of an audience before." Clara leaned in closer, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm certain. I mean, come on. It's not every day we get a tech mogul and space pioneer playing piano at a lavish party. You can't back out now, can you?" She was testing him, pushing him, but also, part of her, though she would never admit it, was genuinely curious to see what Elon Musk, the genius inventor, was capable of in the realm of music. Could he pull it off? Or would he embarrass himself in front of the most influential people in the world? Elon hesitated for a moment, scanning the room full of expectant faces. Then, with a sigh, he shrugged. "All right, you've got me. But don't expect anything too spectacular." Clara's smile widened. "Oh, I'm counting on it." With that, Elon walked toward the piano, the spotlight now fully on him. He sat down at the grand instrument, the sound of his chair scraping against the marble floor almost too loud in the silence that followed. The guests watched with bated breath. As he placed his hands on the keys, Clara felt a strange tension in the air. She had expected some nervous fumbling, a few wrong notes, maybe a few awkward moments. After all, this was Elon Musk, not some professional musician. But what happened next would change everything. Elon's fingers moved with surprising confidence. The first notes were slow, deliberate, almost as if he were testing the instrument. But then, something extraordinary happened. He seemed to lose himself in the music. His fingers flew over the keys with a grace and precision that stunned everyone in the room. It wasn't just a casual attempt at playing. It was an intense, beautiful piece of music that filled the room with an energy Clara had never expected. The guests, who had initially been skeptical, now stood in complete silence, their eyes wide in astonishment. Clara herself was frozen in place, her mouth slightly agape as she watched Elon transform into something else entirely. He wasn't just Elon Musk anymore. He was a pianist, a musician, creating something magical in front of their eyes. As the last note hung in the air, a hush fell over the room. For a moment, no one spoke. It was as if the world had stopped spinning. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, and she could hardly believe what she had just witnessed. "Wow," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know you had it in you." Elon, who had now returned to his usual composed demeanor, gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "There's a lot about me people don't know." The room erupted in applause, but Clara stood there, completely speechless. She had expected a show, something to laugh at. Instead, she had witnessed a hidden talent that left her in awe. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt humbled. Elon glanced over at her, a knowing look in his eyes. "So, what's next? Another challenge?" he asked, his tone playful but with an underlying seriousness. Clara could only nod, still processing what had just happened. This was no longer just about a piano performance. It was about something deeper, something she hadn't expected to find in Elon Musk, the man who had become a larger-than-life figure in her world. As the night continued, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that her perception of Elon had just completely shifted. He wasn't just the tech mogul everyone talked about. He was a man of depth, of unexpected surprises, of hidden passions. And in that moment, Clara realized something. This wasn't just another game to her anymore. This was something real. Clara Alexander wasn't always the poised, polished woman she appeared to be at her lavish parties. Born into a family of self-made millionaires, she had been raised in the spotlight. Her father, Charles Alexander, was a brilliant businessman who built his empire from scratch, turning his modest investments into a tech conglomerate that rivaled some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley. Her mother, Evelyn, a former model turned socialite, taught Clara the importance of appearance, of elegance, of knowing how to command a room. But despite the wealth, the fine clothes, the luxurious vacations, and the never-ending stream of parties and galas, Clara often felt disconnected. She was surrounded by people who admired her family's wealth but didn't really know her. They saw the perfect daughter, the gracious hostess, the powerful woman who seemed to have everything under control. What they didn't see was the girl who spent sleepless nights wondering if anyone would care about her if she didn't have the money or the name. As a child, Clara had always been the center of attention. At school, she was the one everyone wanted to befriend, not because of her personality, but because of her family's fortune. The other children didn't know how to approach her, and when they did, it was usually because they wanted something. An invitation to the Alexander family's private yacht, or to be seen at one of the famous galas her parents threw. Clara had learned to play the game early, charming her peers with her perfect manners, her intelligence, and her undeniable beauty. But deep down, she was lonely. Her loneliness was most profound in her relationship with her parents. Despite their success, their marriage was rocky. Charles was a workaholic, consumed by his empire, leaving little time for family. Evelyn, on the other hand, was often too busy with charity events and social circles to offer Clara the emotional support she needed. Clara learned to fend for herself, to bury her emotions beneath a veneer of confidence and sophistication. She became the perfect picture of the wealthy, high-society young woman, except that her heart was never fully engaged. In college, things didn't get any better. She attended an Ivy League school, where she was once again thrust into a world of wealthy, ambitious individuals. There, she met Robert. He was charming, witty, and handsome. Exactly the type of man Clara's mother would approve of. Robert came from an equally powerful family, and their relationship, at first, seemed to be a perfect match. But as the months passed, Clara began to realize that Robert, like so many others, was more interested in the status her name brought him than in her as a person. Their relationship faltered as Robert's ambition clashed with Clara's need for genuine connection. By the time she was 25, Clara had everything she could ever want: money, status, a beautiful home, and the admiration of people around her. But she still felt empty. It wasn't until a year ago, after a painful breakup with Robert, that Clara started to question the life she had built. She had spent so many years perfecting her image, trying to be the person others wanted her to be, that she had never truly explored who she was beneath it all. That's when she decided to take a break from her usual life, spending more time focusing on her passions, traveling, and most importantly, trying to find a sense of purpose that went beyond wealth and status. It was during this period of self-discovery that Clara's curiosity about Elon Musk began to grow. She had followed his career. Of course, who hadn't? The visionary who had taken humanity to Mars and revolutionized electric cars was undeniably one of the most captivating figures of the century. But Clara saw him not just as a billionaire genius, but as someone who seemed, in some strange way, untouched by the world around him. Elon was often described as awkward or eccentric, but Clara saw something deeper, a complexity, an authenticity that she hadn't encountered before. It wasn't just his accomplishments that drew her in. It was the way he carried himself, as if he were focused solely on changing the world, rather than pleasing anyone. And that was something Clara had never understood. How someone could have such confidence without being tethered to the approval of others. This fascination with Elon reached its peak when Clara decided to host one of her infamous soirees. She didn't invite him at first, but something deep within her knew that she had to. For reasons she couldn't fully explain, she felt that meeting him could hold the key to something she had been searching for her whole life, a sense of realness, of depth, of connection. But she wasn't prepared for what happened when he actually accepted the invitation. As she had expected, the room was full of influencers, tech moguls, and celebrities, all eager to catch a glimpse of the man who was shaping the future. But when Elon walked in, he was different from what she had imagined. The cool, confident billionaire everyone talked about was nowhere to be seen. Instead, there was a man who seemed just as human as the rest of them, with an almost childlike curiosity in his eyes. Clara watched him throughout the evening, intrigued by his quiet confidence, the way he didn't feel the need to fill every silence with conversation, and the way he listened, really listened, when someone spoke to him. But it wasn't until she dared to challenge him with the piano that she saw a side of him she hadn't expected. An unexpected talent, a kind of magic that made her stop in her tracks. And in that moment, something shifted. Clara realized that maybe she had spent so much time looking for answers outside herself, through her wealth, her image, and her connections, that she hadn't considered the possibility that the answers might lie within the people around her. Elon Musk had always been different. From a young age, he had been obsessed with understanding how things worked. Unlike the other kids who played sports or hung out with friends, Elon spent most of his childhood devouring books, particularly those that had anything to do with science, technology, and space. His mind, even as a boy, was constantly running at full speed. While his peers talked about the latest cartoons or their favorite sports teams, Elon was thinking about rockets, electric cars, and how to change the world. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, Elon's early years were marked by a sense of isolation. His parents, May and Errol Musk, had divorced when he was young, and his relationship with his father was strained, to say the least. Errol Musk, a brilliant engineer and entrepreneur in his own right, was also emotionally distant, and Elon never quite felt the approval or connection he longed for. Instead, he found solace in his mother, May, a model and dietitian who supported his interests, although she too struggled with her own challenges. Growing up, Elon was bullied relentlessly. He was an awkward, bookish kid who didn't fit in with the other boys. His classmates saw him as different, and they let him know it, often in cruel ways. Elon, small for his age, was pushed around and taunted. This difficult period in his life shaped much of his outlook on the world. He became more reserved, more determined to find a way to rise above the cruelty of his peers. At age 12, Elon built his first computer, a home-built video game that he sold to a computer magazine for $500. That small victory sparked something inside him. It wasn't just about making money. It was about the power of creation, of building something out of nothing, and of proving that he could achieve the impossible. This sense of empowerment stuck with him, and from that point on, he was unstoppable. At 17, Elon moved to Canada to attend Queen's University, eventually transferring to the University of Pennsylvania in the U.S. It was here that he began to truly embrace his entrepreneurial spirit. He studied physics and economics, seeking to understand both the theoretical and practical sides of technology and business. But even as he worked toward his degrees, his mind was already focused on bigger things. He dreamed of creating something revolutionary, something that could change the course of human history. In 1995, at the age of 24, Elon dropped out of a PhD program at Stanford after just 2 days. He realized that the future he wanted to create wasn't going to be found in academia. It was going to be found in Silicon Valley, where technology and business intersected. So, he dove into the startup world, co-founding Zip2, a city guide software company, with his brother Kimball. The company was eventually sold for nearly $300 million, and Elon was just getting started. After Zip2, Elon went on to found X.com, an online payment company that would eventually become PayPal. The company was sold to eBay for $1.5 billion in stock, making Elon a multimillionaire by the age of 30. But for him, money wasn't the end goal. It was just the beginning. His true passion lay in the future, specifically, the future of humanity. In 2002, Elon founded SpaceX, with the bold ambition of making space travel affordable and accessible to all. Over the years, SpaceX faced countless setbacks, failed rocket launches, technical challenges, and financial struggles, but Elon never gave up. His belief in the importance of space exploration, coupled with his relentless drive, kept him moving forward. And eventually, his hard work paid off. In 2012, SpaceX became the first privately funded company to send a spacecraft to the International Space Station. But even with all of his success, Elon never stopped thinking about the future. He was never satisfied with the status quo. His mind was constantly racing, constantly searching for the next frontier. Whether it was electric vehicles through Tesla, solar energy with SolarCity, or tunneling through the Earth with the Boring Company. But despite his success in business, Elon had always been a deeply private person. The world saw him as a tech mogul, a visionary, someone who could do the impossible. Yet, in many ways, Elon felt like an outsider. He wasn't interested in the celebrity lifestyle or the constant spotlight. In fact, he often found it overwhelming. The more successful he became, the more he retreated into himself, preferring the quiet solitude of his work over the loud chatter of the world around him. His romantic relationships, too, had been complicated. He had married twice, both times to women who were incredibly successful and accomplished in their own right, but neither relationship lasted. Elon had always struggled with balancing his intense work ethic and personal life. He would become so consumed by his ventures that he'd often neglect the people closest to him. It wasn't until recently that he began to realize something important. His work, his success, and all the money in the world couldn't fill the void of loneliness that seemed to follow him everywhere. Despite having billions of dollars, he longed for something deeper. A real connection. Someone who understood him, not just as a tech genius, but as a person. And that's where Clara came in. Elon didn't know much about Clara when he received the invitation to her party. He had heard her name before. She was, after all, a well-known figure in Silicon Valley, but he didn't have any particular expectations. He wasn't a fan of big parties or the glamorous social scenes that often accompanied the tech elite. But there was something about her invitation that intrigued him, something different about her. So, he showed up. And now, here he was, standing by the grand piano at her mansion, feeling the weight of the spotlight and the challenge she had unexpectedly thrown at him. Clara's request had taken him by surprise, but it also triggered something in him. What would it be like to show a different side of himself? To step outside of his comfort zone and do something completely unexpected? As he sat down at the piano and began to play, something changed within him. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about rockets or electric cars. He wasn't thinking about business or investors. He was just playing. And in that moment, he felt a rare sense of peace, a connection to something real. The next few days after the party were a blur for Clara. It wasn't the parties or the afterglow of a successful evening with some of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley that lingered in her mind. No, what occupied her thoughts was something unexpected, something she hadn't anticipated at all. Elon Musk. Her initial plan had been simple. Challenge him. Get a reaction. Watch the tech mogul squirm in front of an audience. But what happened that night left her utterly speechless, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had witnessed something extraordinary. Clara sat at her desk in her office the following afternoon, sorting through emails, press releases, and business proposals. But her mind wandered back to that moment at the grand piano. The rawness of his performance, The way he seemed so consumed by the music. She had always associated Elon with rocket ships and billion-dollar ventures, but that night, he had shown a different side of himself, a side that was profoundly human, vulnerable even. She hadn't been prepared for it, but now she was torn. What was she supposed to do with this newfound admiration for him? Clara had spent her entire life building walls around herself. She was the queen of her world, untouchable, always in control. But Elon had made her question everything. In his music, she saw something beyond the tech mogul, the man behind the genius. A complexity that made her feel both intrigued and, dare she admit, drawn to him in a way she hadn't experienced in years. And that thought both excited and terrified her. On the other hand, Elon seemed just as reluctant to acknowledge whatever connection had sparked that night. After the piano performance, he had been polite but distant, almost like he was eager to retreat into the familiar realm of technology and business. Clara couldn't tell if he was uncomfortable or just uninterested in her, but one thing was clear. He wasn't the type of man to indulge in casual flirtation or play games. This left Clara with two emotions she wasn't used to: uncertainty and curiosity. But there was something else, something even more unsettling. Elon Musk, the man who had built companies worth hundreds of billions of dollars, the man who could change the course of human history with the stroke of a pen, wasn't afraid of failure. He never backed down from a challenge. He took risks, not because he had to, but because he was driven by a deep, unshakable belief in what he could accomplish. That was the part that intrigued Clara the most. In the business world, she was used to being the one in control. She was always the challenger, always the one setting the stakes high. But Elon, he had set a new bar. She didn't know if he was aware of it, but he had just raised the stakes in a way she couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Elon was dealing with his own set of internal conflicts. Since the party, he hadn't been able to stop thinking about Clara either. Despite his usual reserved nature, something about her intrigued him. No, captivated him. She was beautiful, intelligent, and powerful, but it wasn't just her wealth or her reputation that drew him in. It was her challenge, her boldness. He had always admired those who weren't afraid to take risks. And that was exactly what Clara had done. She had dared him to play the piano. But it wasn't just the challenge itself. It was how she had dared him to reveal something about himself that he usually kept hidden. Music wasn't something Elon shared with anyone. It wasn't something he did for attention, and he didn't typically allow himself to be vulnerable in front of others. But Clara had gotten under his skin, in a way no one else ever had. It wasn't just her challenge at the piano. It was the way she had watched him, the way she had stood there, mesmerized by the music, the way her face softened as the last note lingered in the air. Elon had always been used to the spotlight. After all, he was a public figure with a billion-dollar empire. But Clara's reaction was different. She wasn't just observing, she was feeling. And in that moment, Elon had felt seen, in a way he hadn't in a long time. But as much as he felt drawn to her, he was also hesitant. His past relationships had left him scarred. His work had always been his refuge, the one thing he could control, and the one thing he knew he could succeed at. But the idea of letting someone in, of allowing a connection with Clara to evolve into something more, terrified him. Still, he couldn't shake the pull. It was a dangerous temptation, one that he had never been able to resist. And as he walked into his office the following morning, with papers and meetings piled high, his thoughts kept drifting back to her. The feeling was undeniable. Something was stirring, and he didn't know how to handle it. In the days that followed, both Clara and Elon continued their routines, but their interactions seemed to grow increasingly strained. The tension between them was palpable, though neither of them would openly admit it. They continued to see each other at high-profile tech events, but they avoided one another's gaze. Elon, ever the enigma, remained aloof. Clara, ever the strategist, kept up her mask of confidence, but the cracks were beginning to show. Every time their paths crossed, there was a fleeting moment of recognition, something more than just mutual respect for each other's successes. Yet, neither could break through the invisible barrier they had both built. The more Clara tried to push him, the more Elon seemed to retreat. And the more Elon withdrew, the more Clara found herself wanting to find a way through to him. It was a game of cat and mouse. and both of them were playing it, albeit in different ways. The stakes, though, were higher than either of them realized. They were two people caught in a cycle of unspoken emotions, with something monumental hanging in the balance. And the longer they danced around each other, the more inevitable the confrontation became. It was an unexpected phone call that changed everything. Clara had spent the last week replaying her interactions with Elon in her mind, each moment unfolding like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. The tension between them had only intensified after their brief exchanges at the parties and tech events. She knew he was avoiding her, but it wasn't like Elon Musk to back away from a challenge. It was time to take matters into her own hands. One evening, as Clara sat in her study going over some new business proposals, her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered, trying to mask the slight unease in her voice. "Clara? It's Elon," came the familiar voice. For a moment, she was speechless. She hadn't expected him to call, not after the way things had left off. She had figured it would take weeks, or maybe even months, before they spoke again, if at all. "Hey, Elon," she finally said, forcing a casual tone. "What's up?" "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation," he said, his voice measured, "and about what happened at the piano." Clara's pulse quickened. So he hadn't forgotten. Neither had she, but she had done her best to push it out of her mind. The idea of Elon, an icon of tech and innovation, sitting down at her piano, letting his fingers play in front of an audience, had been one of the most surreal experiences of her life. And yet, there was something about it that stuck with her. It made her feel something. Something raw, something real. "Really? I wasn't sure if I made an impression," Clara replied, trying to sound more composed than she felt. "You did. More than you think," Elon said quietly. There was a pause, and Clara could almost hear him weighing his words before he continued. "I want to see you again, in a different setting. Maybe we can talk?" Clara's heart skipped a beat. There it was. The invitation she had been waiting for, but she hadn't expected it to come so soon. And yet, despite her initial excitement, she hesitated. She had always been in control of every situation. Business, relationships, even the way people perceived her. But Elon was different. His presence, his intellect, his mysteriousness, it all disarmed her. What if this meeting, this conversation, changed everything? What if it led to something neither of them was prepared for? "Sure," Clara said, finally giving in to the pull she had felt. "Let's meet tomorrow. I'll text you the details." Elon agreed, and they hung up. Clara stared at her phone for a long moment after the call ended, uncertain of what to make of it. She had never felt this unsure before. In her world, she was the one who controlled the narrative. But now, she was stepping into unknown territory. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. The next day, Clara and Elon met at a quiet, upscale cafe nestled in the heart of Silicon Valley, far away from the prying eyes of their usual social circles. The setting was intentionally low-key. Neither of them wanted the attention or pressure of being seen together in a more public setting. Elon was already there when Clara arrived, sitting at a small table near the back, looking every bit the tech mogul but somehow more relaxed than usual. He stood as she approached, his tall frame a stark contrast to her own. There was a brief moment of silence as they exchanged a handshake, the air between them thick with unspoken words. "I didn't expect you to actually show up," Elon said, offering a half-smile. "I didn't expect you to ask me to," Clara replied, taking a seat opposite him. There was something about him, something in the way he carried himself, that made her feel both at ease and on edge. She had never had to work so hard to understand someone before. "I've been thinking about you, Clara," Elon said, his voice suddenly serious. "Not just the party or the piano, but everything. You've got this ability to challenge me. I didn't know I needed that until now. Most people just ask me about my companies, my tech, what I'm doing next. But you see something else. You see something I didn't even know was there." Clara was taken aback. Was he saying what she thought he was? That he saw something more in her than just another rich heiress looking for attention? It wasn't like Elon to open up like this, to admit that someone had made him rethink his own motivations. "I didn't expect to challenge you," Clara said, her voice softer than usual. I just wanted to understand you. You're not like anyone else I know. You don't play by the same rules, and that's fascinating to me. Elon leaned forward, eyes intense. I've spent my whole life building things that could change the world. But sometimes I wonder if I've built all this at the expense of, well, of anything else. Relationships, connection. It's not something I've ever prioritized. But after meeting you, I started thinking, maybe I've been doing it all wrong. There was a vulnerability in his words, something Clara hadn't expected. For all his achievements, Elon Musk was still a man who, like everyone else, was searching for something more. Something that couldn't be quantified by dollars, rockets, or accolades. Clara felt the walls she had built around herself start to crack. Here was a man who had everything, and yet, in this moment, he seemed more human than anyone she had ever met. But even as she felt a connection growing between them, there was still that fear. What did this mean for her? What would happen if she let herself get too close? Could she handle the kind of vulnerability Elon was offering? She had always played the game of control, but now she was teetering on the edge of losing it all. Before she could respond, Elon looked at her with a question in his eyes. So, what do you think? Is it possible for us to figure this out? Clara was silent for a moment, weighing the consequences of her next words. The question wasn't just about them anymore. It was about everything she had built, her empire, her identity, her place in the world. And yet, as she looked into Elon's eyes, she couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something bigger than anything she had ever known. I think, Clara started, her voice steady, I think we should find out together. And with that, everything changed. As the days went by, Clara and Elon began to spend more time together. Their meetings, once tentative and filled with the usual formalities, gradually became more comfortable. Whether it was grabbing coffee in the early mornings before their busy schedules or taking quiet walks in the park, their connection deepened in ways neither of them had expected. For Clara, it was both exhilarating and disorienting. She had always prided herself on being in control, on being the one who called the shots. But with Elon, she felt herself letting go, opening up in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. She had never allowed anyone to break through her walls, never allowed herself to be vulnerable with someone, let alone a man like Elon Musk. But somehow, in the space of their quiet moments together, she felt more seen than she had ever felt before. For Elon, the experience was equally profound. He had spent most of his life focused on his ambitions, space exploration, sustainable energy, and transforming industries. He had achieved more than most people could dream of. Yet he found himself feeling empty, like something was missing. That missing piece, he realized, might just be Clara. She made him question everything he had worked for, every decision he had made. Was he truly building a future for humanity, or was he simply running away from his own fears and loneliness? It was in the midst of all this uncertainty and growing tension that Clara received the call. It was from her lawyer. Elon, there's something we need to talk about, she said, her voice tight. They were sitting together in the small cafe they frequented, but today, the mood was different. He could feel it in the air. I just got word that there's a potential issue with one of my major business deals. It's not just any deal. This one could affect everything. My empire, my future. Elon's brow furrowed. Clara had always been the confident one, the one who controlled every situation, and now she was shaken. What's going on? He asked, his voice steady, though he couldn't hide the concern in his eyes. I've been targeted. Someone within my circle has been leaking confidential information to my competitors, Clara replied, her voice steady but strained. And I think they might be going after everything I've worked for. If they manage to control this deal, it could ruin me. Elon's mind raced. This wasn't just about a business deal. It was personal. He had seen Clara face challenges before, but this felt different. It was as if the very foundation of her identity was being threatened. She wasn't just worried about losing money. She was worried about losing everything she had built, everything she had fought for. Clara, you're not alone in this, Elon said, his voice full of resolve. I know what it feels like to have everything on the line, but you can't let them take it from you. We'll figure this out. Together. Clara looked at him, her eyes a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. She had always prided herself on her independence, but in this moment, she realized just how much she needed him. She had spent so long building a fortress around herself that she had never allowed anyone inside. But Elon was different. He understood what it was like to fight for something bigger than oneself. He understood the stakes. But the threat was real. It wasn't just about business, it was about power. Someone was trying to take control of everything Clara had worked for, and she wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. In the following days, Elon and Clara put their heads together, working tirelessly to uncover the source of the leak. They discovered that someone within her inner circle had been feeding information to her competitors, selling out her business for a payout. The realization hit hard. Clara had trusted this person, had brought them into her world, and now they had betrayed her. It was a turning point. Clara had always prided herself on her ability to control her surroundings, but now she found herself at the mercy of forces she couldn't control. And as the pressure mounted, so did the emotional toll. She had to make decisions, hard decisions, that would affect not only her business but also her relationships. Her trust in others had been shattered, and the walls she had spent years building were now coming down. It was a loss of innocence, a painful reminder that the world wasn't as predictable as she had once believed. And then, something unexpected happened. As Clara was pacing in her office one night, trying to come up with a strategy to deal with the situation, Elon walked in. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, watching her, waiting for her to acknowledge him. "Everything is falling apart," Clara muttered, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't believe this is happening. I've worked so hard." Elon moved toward her, his footsteps quiet on the hardwood floor. Without saying a word, he placed a hand on her shoulder. The touch was gentle, but it carried a weight of reassurance that Clara hadn't realized she needed. "You've built an empire, Clara. You're not going to lose it just because someone tried to tear you down. You've faced worse. And you'll get through this too," Elon said, his voice soft but unwavering. Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. In that moment, she realized that this was what she had been searching for all along. Not just success, not just power, but someone who could stand by her side through the storms, someone who would fight with her, not just for her. Her eyes met Elon's, and for the first time, Clara allowed herself to be vulnerable in a way she had never done before. She wasn't alone. She wasn't the untouchable, unshakable woman she had always tried to be. She was human, and it was okay to be human. "I don't know if I can do this without you," Clara said, her voice cracking, "but I'm not giving up." Elon's expression softened. "You don't have to. You've never had to do anything alone, Clara. We're in this together." In that moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift, even if just for a second. They weren't just business partners anymore. They were something more. They were allies, friends, and perhaps something deeper. It wasn't going to be easy, but together, they would face whatever came next. And for the first time, Clara felt the weight of the future shift, no longer a burden, but a possibility. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of late nights and tense meetings. Clara's world had been turned upside down. What had once seemed like an unshakable empire now felt like it could crumble at any moment. The leaks in her business were far more damaging than she had initially realized, and the people who had once been her allies were now under suspicion. But Clara wasn't one to back down. If anything, the betrayal had made her more determined than ever to fight for what was hers. She couldn't afford to lose everything she had built, and with Elon by her side, she knew she had the strength to push through the storm. In their moments alone, Clara could feel the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. Elon had been a constant support, but even he couldn't shield her from the pressure of the situation. Every call, every meeting, was a reminder of how much was at stake. The people she trusted, the ones who had been closest to her, had sold her out, and now she had to clean up the mess they had left behind. "I can't believe this is happening," Clara muttered one evening as she sat at her desk, reviewing documents for yet another meeting. "I've spent my entire life building this, and now it's all falling apart." Elon, who had been pacing the room as he reviewed the situation with her, stopped and turned toward her. "You can't think like that. You're not going to lose everything. You've got a chance to fix this." But you need to focus, clear your mind, and let's figure this out. You've always been good at finding a way. Clara looked up at him, her exhaustion evident in her eyes. He had been a rock through this whole ordeal, always steady, always focused on the solution rather than the problem. She had never been able to rely on anyone like this before. "You're right," Clara said, taking a deep breath. "I can't let this take me down. I won't let it." The two of them spent the following days working around the clock, gathering evidence, meeting with lawyers, and tracking down the source of the leak. But the deeper they dug, the more complicated the situation became. Every lead seemed to open up a new set of questions, and Clara found herself facing more enemies than she had ever anticipated. The business world was cutthroat, but this was something far worse, a betrayal from within. It was in the middle of one of their late-night strategy sessions when Clara received the call. "Elon, it's happening," Clara said, her voice trembling as she looked at the phone. "I just got word that they're about to announce the deal. If they go through with it, I'm finished." Elon looked at her with a sharp, unwavering focus. "We need to move fast. Do you have the documents from your legal team? The ones that show the breach of contract?" Clara nodded, quickly pulling up the files on her computer. "Yes, but even with that evidence, it's going to take time to shut this down. I can't afford to wait." "Elon, they're going to announce this deal tomorrow. If I don't stop them now, everything I've worked for is gone. I won't have control of my own company anymore." "Then we stop them tonight," Elon said decisively. "We'll make sure they know you're not going down without a fight." Elon didn't hesitate for a second. He made a few calls, contacting influential figures in the industry, calling in favors he had earned over the years. Clara watched in awe as he navigated the situation with ease, calling upon his vast network of connections. Within hours, a small army of lawyers, business experts, and security personnel had been assembled. Elon was a force of nature when it came to business, but Clara had always known that. What surprised her now was the way he operated with her. Like they were a team, not just two individuals with their own agendas. He was giving her the space to take control, but he was also showing her how to fight for what was rightfully hers. By the time they arrived at the boardroom for the final meeting, Clara was on edge. The room was filled with executives, lawyers, and board members from both sides of the deal. But there was one thing they hadn't counted on: Clara's ability to turn the tables. As she walked into the room, a hush fell over the crowd. She was no longer the calm, collected businesswoman they were used to seeing. There was fire in her eyes now. She had a purpose, and no one was going to take her down without a fight. "Elon and I have spent the past few weeks uncovering the full extent of this breach," Clara said, standing tall at the head of the table. "What you all have been hiding will be exposed. The deal you're trying to push through is based on stolen information, and we have the evidence to prove it." The room erupted in chaos as Clara's team began presenting the damning evidence. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Clara saw the tables turn. The board members who had been so sure of their victory now looked uneasy, their faces paling as they realized that their plan was falling apart. The meeting went on for hours, but in the end, Clara emerged victorious. The deal was halted, the betrayers were exposed, and Clara regained control of her empire. But the cost had been high. Her trust in the people around her had been shattered, and it would take time to rebuild. Still, she had done what she had to do. As she stood in the boardroom, watching the chaos unfold, Clara felt a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion. She had won, but at what cost? "Thanks," she said quietly to Elon, who had been standing by her side throughout the entire ordeal. "No thanks needed," Elon replied with a small smile. "You did all the work. I just helped you remind them who you are." Clara looked at him, the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on her. She had been tested in ways she hadn't expected, but in the end, she had come out stronger. She wasn't just Clara, the heiress and businesswoman anymore. She was someone who could fight back, who could protect what mattered most. And through it all, she realized something else, something that she hadn't fully understood until now. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Elon, and that made all the difference. The aftermath of the battle was far from easy. Clara had won, but the victory was bittersweet. As the news broke that the deal had been thwarted, a storm of media coverage flooded her world. Headlines that had once painted her as the unstoppable businesswoman now described her as a survivor, a woman who had faced the darkest sides of betrayal and came out on top. Yet, Clara knew there was still much work to be done, work that was far less glamorous than what the public saw. The most painful part of all was the toll it had taken on her relationships. The people she had trusted, who had been by her side for years, were no longer there. Some were fired, others arrested, and a few simply walked away, unwilling to face the consequences of their actions. Clara had spent countless hours working with her lawyers to salvage what remained of her reputation and restore her business. It felt like an endless fight, but with each battle she won, she grew more determined. Elon, on the other hand, had been a constant support. Every day, after meetings, after the whirlwind of calls with executives, lawyers, and security personnel, he was there. He was never too busy to listen, never too tired to offer advice. Their connection deepened, but in ways Clara wasn't ready to fully understand yet. Every time she saw him, she felt a tug, an unspoken feeling she hadn't allowed herself to explore before. He had been her rock throughout this process, and yet she still couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship was shifting in ways neither of them had anticipated. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings and late-night phone calls, Clara found herself at home, staring out at the sprawling skyline of the city from her penthouse window. The weight of the world was still on her shoulders, but for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a moment of peace. The doorbell rang, breaking her train of thought. Clara looked up, surprised. She wasn't expecting anyone. She stood up and made her way to the door, her mind racing as she wondered who it could be. When she opened the door, there stood Elon, a small, reassuring smile on his face. He was holding a bottle of wine in one hand and a takeout bag from her favorite restaurant in the other. "I thought you might need a break," he said simply, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. It was a familiar gesture, one that spoke volumes about how much he had come to care for her. Clara couldn't help but smile. "You know, I've been so busy these past few weeks, I've forgotten what a break feels like. Come in, let's have some wine." As Elon settled in, Clara poured them both a glass of wine, and they sat down together on the couch. The tension in her shoulders began to ease as they started to talk about everything but the chaos of the past weeks. They laughed about the ridiculousness of some of the media reports, joked about the crazy things they had to do to keep up appearances, and shared stories from their childhoods. For a while, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. For the first time in so long, Clara allowed herself to simply be with someone. No stress, no pressure, just the quiet comfort of someone who understood her better than anyone else. "You know," Clara said after a long silence, "I've spent my entire life trying to control everything. My business, my image, my relationships. And for a long time, it worked. But after all of this, I've realized that control doesn't really protect you. It just keeps you isolated." Elon nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "I get it. It's easy to hide behind success, behind the things you can control. But sometimes, you have to let go. You have to trust that people will be there, even when things fall apart." Clara looked at him, the weight of his words settling over her. There was a raw honesty in his voice that she hadn't fully noticed before. He wasn't just talking about business, he was talking about life, about love, about vulnerability. And Clara, for the first time in her life, was beginning to see that he wasn't just someone to work with or admire from afar. He was someone who could be more, someone she could trust. But trusting someone, really trusting someone, was terrifying. After everything she had been through, Clara wasn't sure she was ready to open herself up in that way. "Elon," Clara started, her voice shaky. Before she could finish, Elon interrupted gently. "Clara, you don't have to say anything. You've been through so much, and I get that this is hard for you. But I want you to know something. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together." His words, simple as they were, hit Clara like a tidal wave. For the first time, she felt the walls she had so carefully built begin to crumble. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the simple truth in Elon's voice. But in that moment, she allowed herself to let go, to acknowledge what had been growing between them. And yet, despite the comfort in his words, there was a small voice in the back of Clara's mind, one that reminded her how much she had invested in keeping everything under control, how much of herself she had put into maintaining the image of the perfect, untouchable businesswoman. Could she really let go of all that? You don't have to be perfect, Clara, Elon said softly, as if reading her thoughts. You don't have to have it all together. I like you just as you are. And I think that's enough. The weight of his words settled over her, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. She wasn't used to hearing such things. She wasn't used to someone seeing her not as the powerhouse businesswoman, but as Clara, the person. A tear slid down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. I don't know if I'm ready for this, for us, she said, her voice a whisper. Elon's hand found hers, warm and steady. You don't have to be ready, Clara. You just have to take it one step at a time. As the evening wore on, Clara found herself drifting in and out of conversation with Elon, feeling more comfortable and at ease than she had in ages. It was a rare kind of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. She wasn't sure what the future held, or what would become of their relationship. But one thing was clear. With Elon by her side, Clara no longer felt alone. Maybe it was time to trust that the future would unfold the way it was meant to. And for the first time in weeks, Clara believed it. As Clara stood on the balcony of her penthouse the next morning, the city sprawled before her, buzzing with life. Yet, despite the frenetic pace of the world around her, she felt a strange sense of calm. The weight that had been crushing her for weeks, since the betrayal, the deal, and the aftermath, was still there, but it felt more manageable now. Maybe it was because of the support Elon had given her, or maybe because she was starting to realize that there were some things she couldn't control, and that was okay. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw it was a text from her lawyer. Clara's stomach dropped. It had been a few days since the deal had been called off, and things had been relatively quiet since then. She had hoped, naively perhaps, that everything was finally settling down. But the message from her lawyer was a reminder that the battle wasn't over yet. She quickly typed back, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. As Clara hung up and began getting ready, she found herself reflecting on the shift in her relationship with Elon. The night before, they had shared a quiet, unspoken understanding, and for the first time in ages, she didn't feel so alone. But Clara wasn't the type of woman to lean on someone else for emotional support. It made her uneasy, even though she had never felt more at ease with anyone before. She grabbed her jacket and made her way out, leaving the familiar comfort of her penthouse behind. The city had a way of making her feel both invincible and insignificant all at once. But as she got into the car, she couldn't shake the thought that the worst might not be over just yet. When Clara arrived at the law firm, she was ushered into the conference room where her lawyer, Abigail, was already waiting. "Clara," Abigail said, standing up as Clara entered, "I'm afraid we've got some new issues on our hands." Clara took a seat across from her, trying to keep her composure despite the unsettling feeling in the pit of her stomach. "What is it? More leaks?" Abigail shook her head. "It's worse than that. Someone has bought a substantial amount of stock in your company. And not just anyone. The buyer is someone with a lot of influence, and they're pushing for a hostile takeover." Clara's blood ran cold. A hostile takeover? This wasn't just a business deal gone bad anymore. This was war. "Who?" Clara asked, her voice sharp. "Elliot Hayes," Abigail replied. "You've heard of him. He's the founder of Hayes Industries. He's been trying to buy out smaller companies to consolidate power. We've been watching him, but this is a serious move." Clara's mind raced. Elliot Hayes was a shark in the business world. Ruthless, calculating, and incredibly wealthy. If he was targeting her company, it meant he saw something worth taking, something valuable. But Clara wouldn't go down without a fight. "How much control does he have now?" Clara asked, her eyes narrowing. "Enough to push for a vote," Abigail said. "He's already reaching out to your board members, trying to sway them. If he succeeds, he'll have enough support to force through a vote that could strip you of your power. You'd essentially be out of your own company." Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She had worked too hard to let someone like Elliot Hayes come in and tear everything down. She had to stop him before he could execute his plan. "I won't let that happen," Clara said firmly. What's our next step? We need to act quickly, Abigail said. We need to secure more votes on the board. But we also need to protect your stake in the company. If you don't want to lose control, you'll have to move fast. Clara stood up, pacing around the room. The clock was ticking, and every minute she wasted gave Hayes more leverage. She thought about her options, and in that moment, she realized she had no choice but to take the fight to him directly. Let's make some calls, Clara said, her voice steady with determination. We're not just going to wait around. I'll meet with the board members myself. It's time to show them who's really in charge. Abigail nodded, her expression tense but impressed by Clara's resolve. I'll arrange everything. But Clara, we need to be strategic. This could get ugly. If you push too hard, we risk alienating the very people who could help you. Clara didn't need a reminder of the stakes. She knew what she had to do. The road ahead was going to be brutal, but it was a road she had walked before. She wasn't going to back down now, not when everything she had worked for was at risk. As Clara left the law office, she felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She knew what needed to be done, but taking on Elliot Hayes was no small task. The man had a reputation for crushing anyone who stood in his way. But Clara had always been a fighter, and this time, she had more than just her company to protect. She had her future and her heart on the line. She had to win. The next few days were a blur. Clara reached out to her closest allies, trying to secure their support before the crucial vote. Elon was there every step of the way, making calls, offering advice, and even joining her for meetings with key stakeholders. She had never seen him so focused, so intent on helping her succeed. Elon, Clara said one night as they sat together in her office, reviewing the latest developments. I'm scared. I've been through a lot in the past few weeks. But this feels different. I can't lose everything again. Elon looked at her, his eyes softening. You're not going to lose, Clara. You fought harder battles than this, and you're not alone. I'm right here. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She had been fighting alone for so long, and for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to do it on her own anymore. Thank you, Clara whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you. You don't have to do it alone, Elon said, his voice warm. You never will again. But even as Clara leaned into his comfort, she knew the battle was far from over. Hayes was still a formidable force, and time was running out. The clock was ticking, and the stakes were higher than ever. This time, Clara wasn't just fighting for her business. She was fighting for everything she had ever wanted. For control, for love, and for a future where she didn't have to be afraid of losing it all. The days leading up to the board meeting felt like an eternity. Clara barely slept, her mind constantly racing. Every moment was filled with strategy, who to call, what to say, how to make sure the board members understood the gravity of what was at stake. This wasn't just a business decision. It was personal. Elliot Hayes wasn't just after her company. He was after everything she had worked for. He saw Clara as a pawn in a larger game. A game he was more than willing to play dirty. But Clara wasn't going to let him win. She wasn't going to let him tear down everything she had built, no matter how ruthless he was. As she sat at her desk, going over the latest reports, she felt a familiar presence at the door. It was Elon, standing there with a quiet, reassuring smile. I brought you some coffee, he said, holding up a cup. Thought you might need it. Clara smiled, grateful for his gesture. Elon had been by her side through everything. In the chaos of her life, he was the one constant. But now, with the board meeting approaching, she couldn't help but feel a pang of fear. She had everything to lose. And although she knew she had people on her side, it was hard not to wonder if it would be enough. Thank you, Clara said as she took the coffee from him. I don't know what I'd do without you. You don't have to do anything alone, Elon said, stepping into the room and sitting across from her. You've got this. We've got this. Clara nodded, feeling a small sense of comfort wash over her. She wasn't in this alone. And for once, she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could win. The night before the board meeting, Clara stood in front of the mirror in her penthouse. She wore a tailored black suit, the sharp lines making her feel more powerful than she had in days. But beneath the surface, her heart was racing. She was about to walk into a room where her entire future would be decided. The fear of failure gnawed at her, but she refused to let it show. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Abigail. The vote is tomorrow. Hayes has made his final offer. The pressure's on. But you can do this. Clara stared at the message for a moment before replying, "Thanks. I'll make sure they understand what's at stake." She took a deep breath and glanced at the clock. The meeting was in just a few hours. She was ready. She had to be. The conference room was cold, the stark white walls and long wooden table feeling almost intimidating. Clara walked in, her heels clicking against the floor with a sharp precision that made the room fall silent. The board members were already seated, their faces a mix of curiosity and caution. At the head of the table sat the man she had come to despise, Elliot Hayes. He was leaning back in his chair, a smug expression on his face. To the casual observer, he appeared calm and collected, but Clara knew that look. It was the look of a man who thought he had already won. "You're late," Hayes said with a thin smile. Clara didn't flinch. "The meeting starts when I say it starts." She took her seat at the opposite end of the table, the tension in the air palpable. Elon entered shortly after, taking a seat beside her. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Elon would be her rock in this fight, just as he had been throughout the entire ordeal. The board members looked back and forth between Clara and Hayes, waiting for the sparks to fly. "I assume you all know why we're here," Clara began, her voice steady. "Elliot Hayes is attempting to orchestrate a hostile takeover of my company. I want to make it clear to all of you that I will not stand by and let that happen." Hayes smirked, but Clara continued undeterred. "This isn't just about business," she said, her eyes meeting each board member's gaze. "This is about what we've built together. What I've built. The innovation, the integrity, the future. It's all on the line, and I will not let someone like Hayes tear it down for his own personal gain." Hayes leaned forward, his tone dripping with arrogance. "Clara, you've had your time. But the reality is, your company is struggling. It's time to move on and let someone who knows what they're doing take charge." Clara's eyes narrowed. "That's rich coming from a man who profits off other people's failures. You don't care about my company, you care about your wallet." The tension in the room was thick. Some of the board members looked uncomfortable, but others seemed intrigued by Clara's fiery response. Elon's eyes were fixed on Hayes, his presence a quiet but constant reassurance to Clara. "I've been in this industry long enough to know how it works," Hayes continued, his voice smooth and condescending. "I've seen the numbers. I've seen the weakness in your business model. The takeover is inevitable. The question is, are you going to make this easy or hard?" Clara stood up slowly, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. "This isn't about making it easy. This is about doing what's right. And I will not let you walk all over everything I've worked for. I will fight with everything I have." She looked to the board members, her eyes unwavering. "You all have a choice. You can either side with the person who's willing to destroy this company for his own gain, or you can stand with me and fight for its future. The decision is in your hands." For a moment, the room was silent. The board members exchanged glances, some looking to Hayes, others to Clara. The weight of the decision was heavy. Clara could feel the eyes of the room on her, waiting for someone to make a move. Then, one by one, the votes began to come in. "I vote for Clara," said Sarah, one of Clara's longest supporters on the board. "I vote for Clara," said another board member, a man who had been wavering in the days leading up to the meeting. I vote for Hayes," said James, the last holdout who had been quietly leaning toward the takeover. The room shifted, the air growing colder. Clara turned to him, her voice sharp. "I thought you'd understand what was at stake, James." James sighed, clearly torn. "I do, Clara, but I can't ignore the numbers." Then, to Clara's surprise, another vote came in, this time from a board member she hadn't expected. "I vote for Clara," said Linda, who had previously seemed neutral. The votes tallied up, and with a final count, Clara had secured a majority. Hayes sat back in his chair, his smirk faltering as the reality of the situation hit him. Clara stood tall, her heart racing but her posture strong. "The vote has been cast. The takeover is over. You're done. Hayes. There was a beat of silence before Hayes finally spoke, his voice laced with frustration. This isn't over, Clara. You've won today, but you'll regret it. Clara didn't flinch. We'll see about that. As Hayes left the room in a huff, Clara felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had fought for what was hers and won. But as the board members congratulated her, Clara knew this battle wasn't truly over. Hayes wasn't the type to give up easily. But for now, she had won. And for the first time in a long while, Clara allowed herself to feel the weight of that victory. She had proven that she was more than just a businesswoman. She was a fighter. And this was only the beginning. The weight of victory was heavy, yet oddly freeing. Clara stood in the empty conference room, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows that gave her a sweeping view of the city below. The board meeting had been a battleground, but she had emerged victorious. Hayes, his takeover plans thwarted, had stormed out, but not before throwing a final, venomous remark. But that was behind her now. She had more important matters to deal with. Elon had been at her side the whole time, a calm anchor in the chaos. But as the hours passed since the vote, Clara found herself thinking about what came next. The immediate danger had been handled, but she knew that Hayes wouldn't just fade into the background. He would find another way to undermine her, to try and take control of what was rightfully hers. "You did it," Elon said, his voice steady and proud as he approached her. He was standing next to her now, looking out over the city. "I knew you would." Clara smiled faintly, though her mind was still racing. "I don't feel like I've won yet. Hayes won't give up that easily. He's dangerous." "Elon," she said, her voice suddenly serious, "do you think I made the right choice? I've been so focused on this fight that I haven't had time to think about everything else." Elon raised an eyebrow, his eyes softening. "What do you mean?" She turned to face him, her gaze unwavering. "The way we're doing this, fighting for control, keeping everything close, does it make me look weak? Have I been too obsessed with protecting what I built, instead of growing it? I don't want to be a woman who only fights for her empire without considering what it actually means to be successful." Elon studied her for a moment, before speaking with quiet conviction. "Clara, you've done something no one else could. You're not just protecting your company, you're protecting what you believe in. It's not about obsession, it's about heart. You've built something amazing, and it's okay to fight to keep it. You've earned every bit of it." Clara's heart fluttered. She wasn't used to hearing someone speak so honestly and openly about her drive. Elon always seemed to know what to say to ground her, to make her feel understood in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Before Clara could respond, her phone buzzed. A quick glance at the screen showed that it was a message from Abigail. "Hayes is planning to make a public move. We need to act fast." Clara's stomach twisted. She had been right. Hayes wasn't going to fade into the background. He was going to come back, stronger than ever. "I need to meet with Abigail," Clara said, quickly gathering her things. She gave Elon a determined look. This isn't over yet. The next few hours were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and strategizing. Clara, alongside her lawyer, Abigail, and a few key members of her team, worked through their options. Hayes had already started spreading rumors to the press, trying to paint Clara as a weak leader who couldn't keep her company afloat. It was the kind of attack she'd been expecting, but that didn't make it any easier to fight. "He's trying to turn the public against you," Abigail explained, her voice low as she looked over the latest headlines on her tablet. "The longer this goes, the more credibility he gains. We need to act fast and shut this down before it spirals out of control." Clara took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the articles. The media was an arena she hadn't fought in much, but if she was going to survive this, she would have to be both smart and ruthless. "I'm going to hold a press conference," Clara declared, her voice resolute. "It's time for me to take control of this narrative. I'm going to tell my story, and I'm going to show them why I won't let anyone tear this down." Abigail looked at her with a mixture of concern and admiration. "Clara, this is going to be risky. Once you speak out, there's no turning back." "I know," Clara said, her gaze hardening, "but it's the only way. I'm not just fighting for my company. I'm fighting for what it stands for. I'm fighting for everything I believe in." Later that afternoon, Clara stood backstage at a makeshift press conference set up at her company's headquarters. She could hear the murmur of the crowd gathering outside, the journalists eager to hear what she had to say. The room was filled with tension. This was a make-or-break moment. Elon was by her side again, offering her a silent but reassuring presence. He placed a hand on her shoulder, and she gave him a small, grateful smile. His support meant more than she could express. "I've got your back," he said quietly. Clara nodded, taking a deep breath before stepping out onto the stage. The spotlight was blinding, but she didn't falter. As soon as she stepped into view, the crowd fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here," Clara began, her voice strong, confident, and unwavering. "I know there's been a lot of speculation, a lot of rumors, but today, I'm here to set the record straight." She paused, letting the words settle. She could feel the weight of the eyes on her, could sense the tension in the room. But Clara didn't flinch. She had spent too long in the shadows of the corporate world, letting others dictate her fate. Today, she was in control. "I am not a victim of circumstances. I am the architect of my own future," she continued. "I've spent years building this company with my blood, sweat, and tears. And I'm not going to let anyone, not even Elliot Hayes, take it from me." The room was silent. The reporters were hanging on every word. Clara could feel their curiosity growing, but she wasn't finished yet. This company stands for something bigger than just numbers on a balance sheet. It stands for innovation, for integrity, for the future. "I will not let anyone, no one, undermine that." She met the eyes of the journalists before her. "Elliot Hayes wants to destroy everything we've worked for. But I'm here to tell you that we won't let him. This is my company, and I will protect it with everything I've got." The press conference was met with a mix of stunned silence and scattered applause. Clara had just turned the tide in her favor, reclaiming the narrative. The journalists had no choice but to report her version of the story now. As Clara left the stage, she could hear the reporters rushing to file their stories. She had done it. She had taken control of the narrative, and Hayes's grip on public perception was slipping. But even as she walked back to her office, Clara knew that Hayes wasn't done yet. He had the resources, the influence, and the ruthlessness to make this personal. But so did she. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The next few days passed in a whirlwind. The press conference had been a success, and Clara's words had made headlines across the country. Hayes's attempts to tarnish her reputation were met with fierce rebuttals from both the media and Clara's supporters. It was a victory, but Clara knew the battle was far from over. She spent the following week buried in meetings, legal strategy sessions, and endless phone calls. The media coverage was relentless, but Clara remained focused. She couldn't afford to lose her momentum now, not when she was so close to keeping her company safe. Elon had remained by her side throughout it all, his unwavering support proving more invaluable than she had imagined. Yet, there was an unspoken tension between them now, something Clara couldn't quite name. It wasn't just the stress of the takeover battle that weighed on her. There was something else, a deeper feeling she couldn't ignore. As they sat together in her office late one evening, Clara looked up from her laptop, her eyes meeting Elon's. He had been unusually quiet over the past few days, but his presence was still a calming force. "You okay?" she asked, breaking the silence. Elon hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "I'm fine. It's been a lot, you know?" Clara smiled gently. "I know. It's been a lot for both of us." She paused, then added, "But we're getting through it, right? We're in this together." Elon met her gaze, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his eyes. "Yeah, we are." There was a beat of silence between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something subtle, but significant. She didn't know if it was just the stress of everything they were going through, or if it was something more. But she wasn't ready to confront it just yet. Before she could say anything further, her phone buzzed with a new notification. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. It was a message from Abigail. "Hayes is escalating. He's launching a smear campaign, attacking your leadership publicly. He's also made a deal with a competitor. This could get worse. Clara's pulse quickened as she processed the message. Hayes was not backing down. If anything, he was intensifying his efforts. She'd known this was coming, but the timing couldn't have been worse. Everything okay? Elon asked, noticing her expression shift. Clara's fingers tightened around her phone. No. Hayes is making his next move. The following day, Clara's fears were confirmed. The press was filled with damning reports. Hayes had publicly accused her of mismanaging company funds, claiming that under her leadership, the company was heading toward bankruptcy. He had also secured backing from one of her competitors, creating an even larger threat. Clara knew this was his attempt to destabilize her. He was trying to turn the market against her, to chip away at her credibility piece by piece. Abigail immediately called a meeting with Clara to discuss their next steps. As Clara entered the conference room, she found Abigail already seated at the head of the table, looking as composed as ever. "Clara, this is going to get ugly," Abigail said, her tone steady. "Hayes has a plan, and he's not backing down. The competitor he's partnered with has deep pockets, and they'll stop at nothing to see you fall." Clara took a seat, her mind spinning. What are our options? We need to hit back. Fast. We can't allow these rumors to linger. You need to present a united front. Show the world that you're in control, that you're not just a target. Abigail's eyes were sharp. We need to get ahead of this. Clara nodded, her jaw tightening. She knew Abigail was right. The situation was dire, but it wasn't impossible to turn around. She had been in difficult situations before. This was just another obstacle to overcome. "I'll do whatever it takes," Clara said, her voice resolute. "But I need your help. I can't do this alone." Abigail met her gaze with a knowing smile. "You've never been alone, Clara. We're in this together." Over the next few days, Clara and her team worked tirelessly to formulate a counterattack. Every angle had to be covered: legal, financial, and public relations. They issued a formal response to the media, detailing their side of the story and disproving Hayes' accusations. They also held a second press conference, this time with financial analysts and key stakeholders, to publicly reaffirm their commitment to the company's future. But despite all the work, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Hayes' influence was growing stronger. The media was eating up the drama, and the stock price had begun to dip. Clara knew that if things didn't turn around soon, they could be facing a full-blown crisis. As she sat in her office late one night, staring at the numbers on her computer screen, she heard a soft knock on the door. Without looking up, she spoke. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Elon stepped inside. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a look of concern. "Clara," he began, his voice quiet but urgent, "we need to talk." Clara finally looked up, her brow furrowing. "What's going on?" Elon took a deep breath before speaking again. "I've been thinking. We've been so focused on the external threats, Hayes, the competitors, the media, but there's something we haven't talked about, something we need to confront." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Elon hesitated, as if gathering the right words. "It's you. You've been pushing yourself too hard, trying to shoulder everything. I can see it. I know you don't want to admit it, but you're burning out. If you don't take a step back, this entire thing could come crashing down. I don't want to see that happen to you." Clara felt a pang in her chest. She had been so focused on the fight that she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge just how much it had taken out of her. She had been so determined not to let anyone see her weakness. But now, in this moment, it was impossible to ignore. I don't know how to stop," Clara said softly, the vulnerability creeping into her voice. "If I stop now, if I take a break, then everything I fought for could slip through my fingers. I can't let that happen." Elon's eyes softened as he stepped closer. "You don't have to do this alone, Clara. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself. You have people who care about you, people who want to see you succeed, not just as a businesswoman, but as a person. You've done enough. Maybe it's time to let others help." Clara stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel the exhaustion creeping up on her. The fight had taken everything she had, and more. Maybe it was time to let others step in, to let herself breathe. I don't know if I can, she whispered, feeling the vulnerability in her voice. But maybe I have to. Elon reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You can. You don't have to do it alone. Clara had always prided herself on her ability to control every aspect of her life. She'd built her empire from the ground up, brick by brick, with nothing but sheer determination and a relentless work ethic. But as the days passed, and she continued to navigate the growing pressure from Hayes and the media, Clara was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, she couldn't do everything on her own. Elon's words echoed in her mind long after he had left her office that night. You don't have to do this alone. It was a simple statement, yet it was one that struck her deeper than she cared to admit. She had spent so much time focusing on the external threats, the smear campaigns, the competitor alliances, Hayes's relentless pursuit, that she hadn't taken the time to check in with herself, to rest, to breathe. That realization hit her hard. The next morning, Clara made a decision. She wasn't going to let herself fall apart. She couldn't. But she was going to change her approach. She was going to lean on those around her. Lean on Elon. She started by calling a meeting with Abigail and her legal team to strategize for the next phase of their response to Hayes. It wasn't enough to simply issue statements. They needed to take action, hit back harder, and take control of the narrative. Abigail entered the conference room first, her usual calm and collected demeanor a constant source of reassurance for Clara. We need to hit him with everything we've got, Clara. Hayes isn't going to stop until he's destroyed everything you've worked for. It's not just a corporate battle. It's personal. He's going after your reputation, your livelihood. Clara nodded, her mind already spinning with ideas. I know. I'm ready to go on the offensive. I've spent too long reacting to his moves. It's time to take control of the conversation. As the meeting progressed, Clara felt the weight lifting slightly. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had a team, Abigail, Elon, and her trusted advisors. Together, they began to strategize their next move, outlining a series of counterattacks that would not only shut down Hayes's lies, but also bolster Clara's public image as a strong, capable leader. Later that day, Clara met with Elon at her favorite cafe, the one place where she could escape the constant barrage of phone calls, meetings, and public pressure. They had been through a lot together, but it felt different now. There was a certain unspoken understanding between them, a trust that had deepened over the past few weeks. Clara could feel the weight of his concern for her, but there was also something more. Something intimate, though neither of them had fully acknowledged it. As she sat down across from him, Clara took a deep breath, trying to clear the fog that had settled over her thoughts. Elon, I'm sorry. I know I've been distant lately. I've been so focused on protecting the company, on staying ahead of Hayes and everything else, that I haven't been present for anyone, really. Elon's expression softened. You don't need to apologize. I know what you're going through. You've been carrying a heavy load, and I've seen how hard you've fought to protect what's yours. But you don't have to do it alone. You've got me. You've always had me. Clara felt a tightness in her chest as she heard the sincerity in his voice. She had always admired Elon for his brilliance and calm under pressure, but hearing him speak like this, so openly, so vulnerably, struck a chord within her. I don't know how to let go of control, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've always been the one who makes the decisions, who calls the shots. It's hard to trust others with my future, with everything I've built. Elon leaned forward, his gaze intense but gentle. You've already built something incredible, and you've got people who believe in you, Clara. People who want to see you succeed, not just in business, but in life. Trust me, trust us. We're not going anywhere. Clara looked into his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it was time to let go, to trust. But as the conversation continued, Clara felt the familiar weight of the situation creep back in. She knew that trusting those around her didn't mean the fight was over. There were still obstacles in her path. Hayes was not going to back down, and the competitor he had aligned with was no small threat. They had resources, they had influence, and they were gunning for her company. Still, Clara felt a shift inside her. She no longer had to face this battle in isolation. She wasn't fighting alone. The next few days were a blur of activity as Clara and her team sprang into action. They launched a public campaign to counter Hayes' smear tactics, exposing his questionable business practices and showing the world that his accusations were baseless. Abigail worked tirelessly on the legal front, ensuring that any attempt by Hayes to interfere with Clara's company was met with swift, calculated resistance. Behind the scenes, Elon was invaluable. He had his own network of connections, and he used them to help Clara gain allies among influential figures in the industry. His quiet strength and strategic mind had proven to be an asset, and Clara found herself relying on him more than ever. Yet, despite all the effort, Clara knew that it was only a matter of time before Hayes made his next move. His reputation was already being questioned, but he was a formidable opponent, and he wouldn't give up without a fight. One evening, as Clara sat in her office going over the latest reports, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Abigail. Hayes has filed for a lawsuit. He's accusing you of fraud. He's not backing down. We need to be ready for a long fight. Clara's stomach dropped. The news was as expected, but the reality of it hit her like a ton of bricks. A lawsuit wasn't just a corporate dispute. It was a full-scale war. She felt the familiar tension in her chest, the weight of the fight pressing down on her. But this time, there was a difference. She wasn't alone. She had people she trusted, people who were ready to stand beside her and fight with her. She looked up, her gaze meeting Elon's across the room. He had been there for her through it all, his steady presence a source of calm in the storm. "It's not over yet, is it?" Clara asked, her voice low but resolute. Elon stood and walked over to her, his gaze never leaving hers. "No, it's not over. But you don't have to face it alone." And in that moment, Clara knew that no matter what Hayes threw her way, she was ready to face it. Not because she was invincible, but because she had something far stronger, the support of those who believed in her. Clara stood at the edge of her balcony, looking out over the city below. The bright lights twinkled in the distance, a stark contrast to the storm that raged in her mind. The lawsuit filed by Hayes had sent shockwaves through her company. Despite the team's best efforts to counteract his smear campaign, the media had picked up the story, turning it into a full-blown spectacle. The pressure was mounting, and Clara felt it in every fiber of her being. She had always believed that success came from sheer willpower, from doing whatever it took to fight for what she wanted. But as the lawsuit progressed, the toll it took on her was undeniable. Elon's words from a few days ago lingered in her thoughts. "You don't have to do this alone." She had been pushing herself to the limit, but now she was at a crossroads. If she wanted to continue this fight, she needed to accept that she couldn't do it all herself. Not anymore. Just as the thought crossed her mind, her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her reverie. It was a message from Abigail. "Clara, we need to meet. There's been a breakthrough. We may have a chance to turn this around." A surge of hope sparked within her. She quickly replied, agreeing to meet with Abigail immediately. If there was even a chance to fight back, she was going to take it. The meeting was set for the following morning. Clara and Abigail sat down in a conference room, a stark contrast to the chaos that had been consuming Clara's life recently. Abigail's expression was more serious than Clara had ever seen it. "I've got some good news," Abigail began, leaning forward. "We've been working with a team of experts to dig into Hayes' financials. It turns out he's been hiding some things, big things. There are discrepancies in his reports, and we've uncovered some shady deals he's been involved in. If we play this right, we could turn this entire thing around." Clara felt a rush of relief. It wasn't just about defending herself anymore. It was about fighting back with the truth. "What do we need to do?" "We need to go public with this information," Abigail said. "We have to make sure the media picks up on it, but we need to be careful. If we do this too soon, Hayes will retaliate, and we'll risk losing our advantage. But if we time it right, we can take him down and use his own tactics against him." Clara nodded. The idea of using Hayes' own corruption to expose him felt almost poetic. For weeks, he had been using lies and manipulation to attack her. Now it was time to turn the tables. But as she looked at Abigail, Clara couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this wouldn't be enough. Hayes was resourceful. He wouldn't go down without a fight. "Do you think this will be enough to win?" Clara asked, her voice quiet. Abigail met her gaze, her expression firm. I think it's a start, but you need to be ready. Hayes is ruthless, and he will stop at nothing to destroy you. We have to hit him where it hurts. Clara took a deep breath. I'm ready. The following days were a whirlwind of strategy and preparation. Abigail and the team worked tirelessly to ensure that everything was in place. Clara knew they couldn't afford any mistakes. This was their best chance, and they had to make it count. As they finalized their plans, Clara felt a growing sense of resolve. She had been through too much to back down now. The media would soon have a new narrative, one that painted Hayes as the villain he truly was. But despite her newfound confidence, there was still the question of Elon. Clara had been spending more time with him than ever before, and she couldn't deny the bond that had grown between them. Their connection was undeniable, but Clara was unsure of where it would lead. She wasn't sure she was ready to face that yet, not with everything else going on. Elon had been there for her every step of the way, always offering support when she needed it most. But Clara wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up this facade of distance. She wasn't used to feeling vulnerable, and the idea of letting someone else into her world in such an intimate way scared her. That evening, as Clara sat in her office, going over the final details of their strategy, Elon walked in. He had a cup of coffee in his hand, a small gesture that made Clara's chest tighten in a way she hadn't expected. Hey, Elon said, setting the cup down on her desk. I just wanted to check in. How are you holding up? Clara looked at him, her gaze lingering on his face. His concern was palpable, and for a moment, she allowed herself to drop her guard. I'm okay. Just trying to keep everything together. Elon's expression softened. I know it's been tough. I know this battle is wearing you down, but you're doing great. You're stronger than you think. Clara swallowed hard, her emotions rising to the surface. I don't feel strong, she admitted. I feel like I'm on the edge. I'm scared, Elon. I'm scared of losing everything. Elon's eyes met hers, and for the first time, there was a vulnerability in his gaze as well. You're not going to lose everything. Not as long as you keep fighting. And you don't have to do it alone. Not anymore. The words hung between them like a promise, a quiet acknowledgement of everything they had been through together. Clara felt a sense of peace wash over her, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to lean into the support that Elon offered. Thank you, Clara said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know what I would have done without you. You'll never have to find out, Elon replied, his voice firm and reassuring. As they sat in silence, a sense of clarity began to settle over Clara. She had been so consumed by the battle, by the need to win, that she had forgotten what it meant to let others in. Elon's support wasn't just a lifeline. It was a reminder that she wasn't in this fight alone. The next morning, as Clara prepared to go public with the damning evidence against Hayes, she felt a sense of determination surge within her. This was the turning point. She was no longer fighting just to survive. She was fighting for her future. With Elon by her side, and her team behind her, Clara was ready to face whatever came next. Clara's heart pounded as she stared at the phone screen, waiting for the world to react. She had just issued the public statement, revealing the critical evidence against Hayes, the financial discrepancies, the hidden deals, the outright fraud. It was bold. It was risky. And it could either be her greatest victory or her downfall. Her fingers hovered over the screen, preparing for the flood of notifications that would come. Would the media buy it? Would the public side with her? Or would Hayes twist the narrative, painting her as the villain once again? The seconds stretched into eternity. Clara's breath hitched as her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw the first message pop up, an alert from a major news outlet. The article was up. Her pulse quickened as she read further, scanning through the details, noting the quotes, the evidence, and how carefully the outlet had handled the information. It was cautious, but it was real. It was exactly what they needed to shift the public perception. Still, the pressure didn't let up. Clara could feel the weight of every moment, knowing that while this was a step forward, it was just the beginning of an all-out war. Elon, Clara murmured, as if he'd heard her thoughts. He had been in the room with her when they hit send on the announcement. He hadn't left her side since the first sign of trouble weeks ago, And now, as the battle intensified, he stood steadfast beside her. Elon, who had been working tirelessly with the media teams, glanced up from his tablet. "It's a good start," he said, his voice calm but sharp with focus. "But now the real fight begins. Hayes will hit back harder than ever. He'll try to discredit us, to claim that these documents were fabricated or manipulated. We need to be prepared for his next move." Clara nodded, her gaze unwavering. "We have the truth on our side. We just need to make sure everyone hears it." That night, as the media began to dissect the story, Clara found herself glued to the television, watching the back and forth unfold. Hayes's team had already gone on the offensive, releasing counterstatements and insisting that the evidence was fabricated. He was already framing the situation as a smear campaign against him, a personal attack by a vengeful ex-business partner. But Clara's legal team had anticipated this. They were ready with rebuttals, with hard evidence, with witnesses who would corroborate her claims. They weren't just going to sit back and let Hayes spin the narrative. Abigail's voice broke through Clara's concentration. "We've received a call from one of Hayes's former employees. He's willing to testify that Hayes has been involved in multiple illegal activities over the years. This could change everything." Clara's heart leaped. This was exactly the kind of ally they needed. A whistleblower. Someone on the inside who could corroborate all the stories they had uncovered. "Get him in here as quickly as possible," Clara ordered. "We're going to make sure Hayes can't lie his way out of this one." As the days wore on, the battle became even more intense. The media cycles shifted rapidly, each new headline adding fuel to the fire. Hayes's team scrambled to contain the damage, while Clara and her team tightened their grip on the narrative. Yet, as much as they had gained ground, Clara could feel the constant pressure. She was exhausted. Every time she thought she could take a breath, another crisis would emerge, another round of attacks. Hayes wasn't backing down. One morning, Clara met with her legal team, her frustration bubbling over. "Why isn't he folding yet?" she asked, her voice laced with a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We have the evidence. We have the truth. Why is he still fighting?" Abigail, who had been quiet during the meeting, looked up from her notes. "It's because Hayes isn't fighting for his reputation anymore, Clara. He's fighting for his empire. He's got everything tied up in this. If he goes down, it's not just the business. It's his legacy." Clara's jaw tightened. "So, this is personal for him. He's willing to destroy everything and everyone to stay on top." "Exactly. And he'll stop at nothing." That afternoon, as Clara walked through the office, she found herself lost in thought. Everything she had built, the companies, the reputation, the entire network of people who depended on her, was at risk. Hayes wasn't just attacking her. He was attacking everything she had worked for. It was in that moment of reflection that Elon walked in. "Hey, I know it's been a crazy few days, but I wanted to remind you of something," he said, his voice low but steady. Clara didn't look up immediately, but she could feel his presence beside her. She knew exactly what he was going to say. "You don't have to do this alone. I'm with you, Clara." The words didn't just offer comfort, they were a lifeline. Clara had spent so long isolating herself, determined to prove she could take on the world alone. But now, with everything on the line, she realized that her fight was not just about her anymore. It was about the people she cared about, the future she wanted to build, and the team that had stood by her side. She met Elon's gaze, her eyes tired but filled with gratitude. "I know. I don't know what I would do without you." Elon smiled. "You'll never have to find out." But just as Clara was starting to feel a renewed sense of strength, a sudden call from Abigail shattered the moment of peace. "Clara, I think you need to see this." Confused, Clara followed Abigail to her office, where Abigail had pulled up a series of headlines. The first few were routine. Updates on the lawsuit, more media coverage, the usual banter. But then Clara's stomach dropped as she read the next one. The rest of the article was a blur. Her name was now being tied to some of the world's most dangerous and notorious criminal organizations. Fake reports, false claims, and, worst of all, they were spreading like wildfire. The media was taking the bait, and Clara was suddenly fighting not just for her reputation, but for her freedom. "They found something, haven't they?" Clara muttered, her voice trembling. This is a setup. It has to be. Abigail nodded, her face pale. It's a smear campaign unlike anything we've seen before. Someone powerful is behind this, and they're using everything at their disposal to take you down. Clara's mind raced. Who could possibly have the resources to fabricate such a story? And why now, when they were finally gaining momentum? Elon, she said suddenly, turning to face him. This has to be someone on the inside. Someone who has access to our networks. Elon's expression darkened, and Clara saw the familiar steely resolve in his eyes. We'll figure it out, and we'll take them down. Together. Clara's mind raced as she paced back and forth in her office. The news of the fabricated criminal connections was spreading faster than a wildfire, and with each new headline, the walls seemed to close in on her. Whoever was behind this smear campaign had deep pockets and a ruthless agenda. They knew exactly how to manipulate the media, how to spin a story that would stick. Elon stood near the door, watching her, his expression unreadable. She could feel his concern, but there was something else, something more determined. He had been silent, observing, calculating the situation, just as Clara had learned to do when everything seemed to spiral out of control. We need to get to the bottom of this, Clara said, her voice tight with frustration. Whoever's behind this is playing a long game, and they know exactly where to hit me. Elon nodded. I agree, but it's not just about this smear campaign. We need to figure out who has access to our networks, who can leak information that's this damaging. It's too clean, too organized. Clara stopped pacing, her thoughts aligning. Too organized. She felt the weight of the truth settling in. This wasn't just an outside attack. This was someone inside her circle, someone close enough to access sensitive information. Abigail, Clara said, calling out as she turned to her assistant who had been silently watching the conversation unfold. Get the cybersecurity team in here. I need a full audit of our systems. Whoever did this had to have access to our files. Private, encrypted files. They knew exactly where to hit. Abigail nodded immediately, already typing something on her phone. On it. Clara could feel the tension in the room growing, the magnitude of what was unfolding finally hitting her. It was no longer just about saving her reputation or defending her company. It was about uncovering a traitor within her own ranks. Hours later, the cybersecurity team had arrived. A group of professionals in dark suits, their faces stern and focused, they began pulling up files on Clara's computer, scanning the network for any signs of breach or suspicious activity. The silence in the room was thick with anticipation as the team worked quickly. Elon sat beside Clara, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. He hadn't said much, but Clara knew his mind was racing through the same possibilities she was considering. They both knew how dangerous it was when someone within the inner circle turned on you. Finally, one of the cybersecurity specialists turned to face Clara. We found something, he said quietly, his voice tinged with the seriousness of the discovery. There was a breach last week. It was subtle, but it's there. Someone had access to your files, your private communications, your financial records. They've been watching you for weeks. Clara's stomach twisted. Who? Do you have a lead? The specialist hesitated. It's hard to pinpoint exactly. The breach was cloaked well, using encrypted servers to route through different locations. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Elon's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Can you trace it back further? Find out who it was. The specialist nodded. It'll take some time, but we're working on it. We'll get you answers. Clara let out a breath, her hands shaking slightly. She had always trusted her team, relied on them for every critical decision, every move in the battle against Hayes. The thought that someone in her inner circle might be sabotaging her, might be working with Hayes or someone even more dangerous, was unbearable. That night, as Clara tried to unwind, the weight of the day's revelations loomed over her. She found herself sitting by the window, staring out at the city below. It was a sight she had grown used to, the sprawling lights, the rhythm of life in constant motion. But tonight, everything seemed different. The city felt colder, more distant, as if something or someone was watching her every move. Elon walked in quietly, his presence calming her more than she expected. He had always been able to ground her, to remind her that, no matter how dark things seemed, they could face it together. "You all right?" he asked softly, sitting down beside her. Clara let out a long, slow breath. "I don't know. Everything feels off. I've spent my whole life fighting for what I want. But this feels like more than just a business rivalry. It's personal. And I'm starting to wonder if I've underestimated the people around me." Elon took her hand in his grip firm, as if to reassure her. "Clara, you've always been strong. You've built this empire from the ground up. Whoever's trying to bring you down, they're going to regret it." She looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "But I can't do this without knowing who's behind it. I need to know who's betraying me." "I know you do, and we will find out. We'll go through every possibility. We'll get the truth." Clara met his gaze, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe him. She had been so focused on the fight ahead, on proving she could handle it all on her own, that she had forgotten what it felt like to trust, to let someone else take the lead when she was too exhausted to keep fighting on her own. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know if I've told you this enough, but I don't know where I'd be without you right now." Elon smiled, his expression warm yet determined. "You'll never have to find out." The next morning, as Clara walked into her office, Abigail was waiting for her with urgent news. "We found something," she said. "The breach. It wasn't just a random attack. We traced it back to one of your senior executives. Someone with access to your most sensitive information." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Who?" Abigail's face was grim. "It's Kyle. He's been siphoning data for weeks, feeding it to an anonymous buyer." Clara felt the floor drop out from beneath her. Kyle, the one person she had always trusted in the business. He had been there from the start, loyal, driven, smart. She never would have suspected him. Elon was immediately at her side, his face taut with anger. "We need to act fast, Clara. If Kyle's in bed with Hayes or someone else, this is bigger than just the lawsuit. This could be the end of everything." Clara's mind raced. She had to act quickly. She couldn't let Kyle destroy everything she had worked for. She couldn't let him get away with this. But there was one thing Clara was certain of now. Kyle had no idea what was coming for him. The weight of the situation pressed down on Clara with suffocating intensity. Kyle, the very thought of him, the man she had once considered a trusted ally, now felt like a dagger in her heart. Betrayal was never easy to digest, but when it came from someone who had been there from the very beginning, it felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked for. The morning after discovering Kyle's treachery, Clara met with Elon in her office. The news had hit hard, but there was no time for weakness. They had to move fast, before Kyle could disappear into the shadows and escape unscathed. "Elon, what do we do now?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Elon's expression was calm, though his jaw was clenched. "First, we need to cut him off from any further access. Immediately. If he's still in contact with Hayes or anyone else, we can't afford to let him do any more damage. Then we go public. If we have the evidence, we need to expose him. He's already made his move, and now it's time to make ours." Clara nodded, her mind already calculating the next steps. She had never been one to shy away from confrontation, and this was no different. The only problem was that Kyle had been one of her key people in running the company. If he had been feeding information to Hayes, the consequences could be catastrophic. "I want him fired," Clara said, her voice cold and resolute. "I want him gone before he can do any more damage." Elon nodded, his tone just as firm. "I'll handle that. But we need to be careful. If we go too hard, too fast, he might try to turn this around on us. He'll fight back." "I'm ready for it," Clara replied, her determination unshaken. "He's already betrayed me. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." Kyle's office was on the top floor of the building. Clara had never imagined that she would be walking into it under such circumstances. As she approached his door, she felt a sudden rush of adrenaline flood her veins. She had trusted him. Now it was time to confront the reality of his betrayal. Elon was beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. But Clara's mind was focused. She was prepared for whatever came next. She had been through too much already to let one man destroy everything. She knocked twice, and the door swung open to reveal Kyle sitting at his desk, a phone pressed to his ear. He looked up, his expression turning momentarily confused before he quickly masked it with a smile. "Clara," Kyle said, his tone falsely warm. "What can I do for you?" "I need to talk to you," Clara said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. Kyle hung up the phone, sensing something was off. He stood up as Clara stepped into the room, followed closely by Elon. "Is everything all right?" he asked, feigning concern. Clara didn't waste any time. "I know what you've been doing, Kyle. I know about the data breaches, the leaks, the deals you've been making with Hayes. You've been feeding him everything you could to take me down." Kyle's face went pale as the realization hit him. For a split second, he seemed to panic, but then he recovered, his demeanor shifting to one of cold defiance. "You don't know what you're talking about," Kyle said, his voice suddenly sharp. "This is all just some kind of misunderstanding. I don't know where you're getting your information, but you're wrong." "I don't think I am," Clara responded coolly. "I have the proof. I've seen the files. I know you've been using my company's information to help Hayes destroy me. You think I didn't notice the signs? You think I wouldn't find out?" Kyle's eyes flickered briefly, and Clara saw the fear beneath his bravado. It wasn't enough, though. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. Elon took a step forward, his eyes locked on Kyle. "You've been compromised, Kyle. It's over. We're cutting you off from the company. Effective immediately." Kyle's face flushed with anger. "You think you can just do this? Do you have any idea who I'm connected to? You're making a huge mistake. If you think you can shut me down like this, you're wrong." Elon's voice was low and unyielding. "We already know what you've been doing. There's no backing out of this. You've made your choice." Clara's eyes narrowed. "I want you out of my company. Now." Kyle took a step back, his mind racing as he realized the walls were closing in on him. He didn't have the leverage he thought he did. His connections, his attempts to manipulate the situation, none of it mattered now. He was cornered. With a final, bitter glare, Kyle spun on his heel and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. Clara exhaled a slow breath, feeling the weight of the confrontation lift from her shoulders. "Good riddance," Elon muttered under his breath. Clara couldn't help but agree. The betrayal was hard to process, but the truth had come to light. Kyle was gone, and now the next step was to go public. They needed to expose him for the traitor he was, before he could strike back. That afternoon, Clara and her team gathered in the war room, preparing for the next phase. The plan was simple. The moment the news broke about Kyle's firing, they would release the full details of the evidence they had against him. His actions, the data he'd leaked, the people he'd been working with, all of it would be laid bare for the world to see. Clara stood in front of the group, her voice strong. "This is it. We're going to expose everything. No more hiding. No more running. Kyle thought he could take us down, but we're taking control now. We'll make sure the world knows who he really is." Abigail nodded. "The media's already primed. They're waiting for the next big twist. Once we hit send, it's all out there." Clara took a deep breath, her hands steady as she prepared to make the final decision. This was the moment. There was no turning back. "Elon, are you ready?" Clara asked, turning to him. Elon met her gaze with unwavering confidence. "I'm with you every step of the way." Clara nodded, her heart pounding with anticipation. She hit the button, and the world began to shift. The headline hit the newsstands within minutes, followed by detailed reports outlining Kyle's actions, his involvement in feeding proprietary information to Hayes, his hidden dealings, and the immense damage he had caused. Clara's legal team had ensured every angle was covered. There would be no room for denial. The truth was out. The floodgates opened as the media picked up the story. Interviews, exposes, analysis. Kyle's career and credibility were obliterated in a matter of hours. But there was one thing Clara knew. This wasn't over yet. Hayes would retaliate, and they needed to be prepared for whatever came next. That night, as Clara sat in her office, watching the media storm unfold, Elon joined her once more. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a quiet pride. "You did it," he said, his voice gentle but full of admiration. Clara exhaled slowly. "We did it. But this is just the beginning. Hayes won't back down. We need to be ready for his next move. Elon sat beside her, his hand finding hers. We will be together. The world had just learned the truth about Kyle. His fall from grace was swift, almost brutal, and Clara watched it all unfold with a sense of cold satisfaction. He had been a thorn in her side for too long, but now, his betrayal was a matter of public record. The media frenzy would die down in a few days, but the damage had been done. Clara had managed to reclaim control of her empire. The trust she had lost was starting to be rebuilt, piece by piece, but she knew better than to think it was over. The world didn't work like that. There was always a next move, a counterattack, a hidden danger lurking in the shadows. Elon had been by her side through it all, a constant source of strength and calm. She had grown used to the way his presence seemed to ground her, to help her think clearly when everything else felt chaotic. But now, as they sat together in her office, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Elon, Clara said, her voice low, as she gazed out the window. What's next? I'm not naive enough to believe Hayes won't retaliate. He's not the type to let things go without a fight. Elon leaned back in his chair, his gaze focused on her with quiet intensity. You're right. Hayes is not someone to underestimate. But we've taken the first step, and now we need to plan for what's coming. We need to be proactive, not reactive. Clara turned toward him, her eyes sharp with determination. So, what do you suggest we do? Elon's lips curled into a small, confident smile. We turn the tables. We make the next move, but this time, we're the ones calling the shots. We hit him where it hurts the most. Clara's brow furrowed in thought. Where exactly would that be? Elon Musk, he replied, his voice steady but laced with an underlying intensity. The next big battle will not be in the courtroom. It will be in the boardrooms, behind closed doors. We need to secure our position, not just legally, but financially and strategically. If we can do that, Hayes will have nowhere to turn. We take control of the narrative before he even has a chance to react. Clara's eyes narrowed. She understood now. Hayes had made his moves in the media, in the court of public opinion, but that wasn't enough. If she could shift the power dynamics and take control of the conversation in the business world, it would shake Hayes' foundation to its core. You're right, Clara said, nodding slowly. We need to leverage our position. We have influence, we have resources, and we have a loyal team. But most importantly, we have to outsmart him. We can't just wait for him to make his next move. We need to set the stage for the next chapter, and we need to do it now. The next few days were a whirlwind of strategy sessions, meetings, and late-night calls. Clara and Elon worked side by side, drafting plans, analyzing market trends, and identifying key players who could help them gain an advantage over Hayes. They needed to strengthen their alliances, secure new ones, and make sure every angle was covered. As Clara sat in the boardroom one evening, reviewing the final draft of their next big move, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. Not long ago, she had been just a young woman with a dream, trying to carve out a place for herself in a world that had seemed so much larger than her. Now, she was a force to be reckoned with, the head of a powerful empire, and a woman who had learned how to fight and win on her own terms. But there was no time for complacency. She couldn't afford to rest on her laurels. Hayes was still out there, and he wouldn't be easily beaten. But Clara knew she had something that he didn't. Resilience, a sharp mind, and an unwavering resolve. With Elon by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. 2 days later, Clara sat in a conference room, surrounded by a few trusted advisors and the cybersecurity team. The meeting had taken a serious turn. There had been whispers about new moves Hayes was making, shadowy dealings, meetings with unknown investors, and rumors of a hostile takeover. But nothing was confirmed. That was about to change. We've been monitoring Hayes' movements, Abigail said, speaking with the authority of someone who had spent hours poring over every scrap of information. There's a new player in town, someone with deep pockets and even deeper connections. It looks like Hayes is preparing for something big. Clara listened carefully, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. Who is this new player? Abigail's eyes met Clara's, and for a moment, there was a flicker of concern. A group of investors led by a tech mogul, someone with a history of aggressive business tactics. They've been funding Hayes' recent endeavors. I don't know all the details yet, but we're looking into it. Elon's eyes hardened. This could be trouble. If Hayes is bringing in outside investors with that kind of backing, it could shift the balance of power. We need to make sure we're ahead of him. Clara's mind began to race as she considered the implications of this new development. If Hayes had managed to secure backing from a tech mogul with deep pockets, it could spell the end of everything she had built. But Clara wasn't the type to back down from a fight. Not now, not ever. We need to get ahead of this, Clara said, her voice cold with determination. If Hayes is preparing for something big, we can't just react to it. We need to disrupt his plans. We need to make our move before he even has a chance to strike. Abigail nodded, already pulling up new files on her tablet. We're working on it, Clara. We've got a few key players we can talk to. Strategic partnerships, new investments, leverage in the market. But we need to move fast. Clara stood up, her eyes meeting each of her team members in turn. I don't care how we do it. We need to turn the tables on him, and we need to do it now. If Hayes wants a war, we'll give him one. But this time, we'll be the ones pulling the strings. Elon's gaze softened, but there was a fire in his eyes that mirrored Clara's resolve. We've got this. We'll make sure Hayes regrets ever crossing you. Clara took a deep breath, the weight of the battle ahead heavy on her shoulders. But she wasn't afraid. The pieces were falling into place, and she had the one thing Hayes didn't, control over her own destiny. As Clara left the meeting, she couldn't help but feel the familiar surge of adrenaline. This was her world now, and no one, not Hayes, not anyone, was going to take it from her. The days following their strategic meeting were a blur of activity, as Clara and her team worked tirelessly to prepare for the war that was about to unfold. They had made their move first, but Hayes was a formidable opponent, and it was clear that he wasn't going to take their challenge lying down. Every aspect of Clara's plan was meticulously crafted, but the uncertainty still lingered. The new investor backing Hayes was a wild card, someone with the power to alter the course of their business war. Clara had learned the hard way not to underestimate anyone, and this new player seemed particularly dangerous. Abigail had been tracking the mysterious investor closely, gathering intel and piecing together the puzzle. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that they were dealing with someone with a long history of aggressive acquisitions. If Clara wanted to win this battle, she needed to be prepared for anything. One late evening, Clara and Elon sat in the quiet of her office, reviewing their final preparations. The glow of the city lights outside illuminated the room, casting a soft glow on their faces. Elon, I'm not going to lie, Clara began, her tone serious. I'm worried. Hayes is a snake, and this new investor is the venom. They won't hesitate to play dirty if it means winning. We need to have a plan in place that can outmaneuver them. Elon studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. You've faced worse before, Clara. This is just another challenge. But you're not in this alone. We've got a solid team, and we've been strategic. We've put ourselves in a strong position. Now it's time to capitalize on it. Clara's eyes hardened as she leaned forward in her chair. I've always been able to see the bigger picture. But what if we don't have all the pieces yet? What if we're missing something important? Elon reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on hers. That's why we've got people like Abigail on our team. We're not flying blind. We'll make sure we're ready for whatever comes next. Clara exhaled slowly, trying to push the tension from her shoulders. She knew Elon was right. They had built a solid foundation, and now it was about executing the plan with precision. But Hayes wasn't going to make it easy. The next day, Clara's worst fears seemed to be coming to fruition. News broke that Hayes and his mysterious new investor were preparing a massive buyout offer. They were targeting one of Clara's most valuable assets, a key piece of technology that had been in development for years. It was a move that could cripple her business, taking away the very thing that had made her company stand out in the market. The news sent shockwaves through Clara's team. Everyone knew the gravity of what was at stake. We can't let them take it, Clara said, her voice tight with urgency as she gathered her team. This technology is everything. If they acquire it, it's game over. We need to come up with a counteroffer that makes it impossible for them to succeed. Abigail looked up from her tablet, her eyes focused. We're already working on it. I've got a list of investors who might be willing to step in, but we need to act fast. If Hayes gets his hands on that technology, he'll have an even stronger position in the market. Clara's mind raced. This was no longer just a business battle. It was a fight for survival. If Hayes succeeded in his buyout, everything she had worked for could come crumbling down. But she wasn't going to let that happen. Elon, what do you think? Clara asked, turning to him. How can we beat him at his own game? Elon's expression was thoughtful, his mind clearly working through the options. It's a matter of timing. If we can get a strategic investor on our side, someone who's not afraid to go head-to-head with Hayes, we can make sure he's the one who ends up losing in the end. Clara nodded, her resolve firming up. We need someone with deep pockets and an even deeper resolve. Someone who can outlast Hayes and keep him from taking over. As the team worked through the logistics, Clara felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't going to back down. They had one chance to beat Hayes at his own game, and she was ready to give everything to make it happen. A few days later, Abigail returned with news that gave Clara a renewed sense of optimism. They had found an investor, a tech mogul with a reputation for aggressively pushing back against corporate giants. The mogul's name was Charlotte Winters, and she had made a name for herself in the industry by challenging the status quo and flipping the tables on larger competitors. Clara's pulse quickened. Charlotte Winters could be the ally they needed. But there was a catch. Winters was notoriously selective about the ventures she invested in, and she didn't make decisions lightly. Clara knew she would need to impress Winters if they were to have any hope of winning her over. We need to meet with Charlotte, Clara said, determination in her voice. This could be our chance to take control of the narrative before Hayes makes his move. The following week, Clara and Elon flew to San Francisco for the meeting with Charlotte Winters. They had done their research. Winters was a brilliant strategist and a shrewd investor, with a track record of successfully backing underdog companies and turning them into market leaders. But she was also known for her tough, no-nonsense approach to business. If Clara wanted her on her side, she would have to prove herself. When they arrived at Winters' office, Clara could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was it. If they could secure Winters' investment, they would have the power to outmaneuver Hayes and secure their company's future. Charlotte Winters greeted them with a sharp smile and a firm handshake. She was tall, with short, dark hair and an air of quiet confidence that immediately put Clara on edge. Winters didn't waste time with pleasantries. So, Clara, Elon, Winters began, her tone direct. I've been following your company's progress, and I have to say, I'm impressed by what you've built. But there's one thing I need to know. Why should I invest in you? Clara took a deep breath, her mind racing for the right words. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was happening, the weight of it was undeniable. She couldn't afford to fail. Charlotte, we're not just asking you to invest in our company, Clara said, her voice steady. We're asking you to invest in a vision, one that can change the entire landscape of this industry. Hayes thinks he can take us down, but we've been through worse. We've fought, and we've won. With your help, we can crush him before he even has a chance to strike. Winters regarded her for a long moment, her gaze calculating. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. All right, Clara, you've got my attention. Let's talk numbers. The days following their meeting with Charlotte Winters were a whirlwind of negotiations, legal talks, and strategic planning. Clara had done what few people had ever managed to do. She had earned the trust and interest of one of the most powerful and influential investors in the tech world. But getting Charlotte Winters to the table was only the first step in a high-stakes game that would require precision, patience, and a bit of luck. As Clara sat in her conference room, reviewing the terms of their potential deal with Charlotte, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was a pivotal moment, one that could either cement her place as a leader in the industry or send her crashing down. She had been here before, standing on the edge of everything she had worked for, but something about this felt different. The pressure was greater than ever. Clara, Elon said, breaking her thoughts, we've got the numbers. The ball is in our court now, but we can't waste time. Hayes is already making moves, and we can't afford to give him the advantage. Clara looked up at him, her brow furrowed in concentration. I know, but Charlotte's not going to make this easy. She's smart. She plays a long game. If we push too hard, we risk losing her support before we even get started. We need to tread carefully. Elon nodded. Agreed. But I have faith in you. You know how to handle these things. Clara felt a surge of gratitude for Elon. Throughout the chaos, he had been her rock. But now, with Charlotte Winters in play, the stakes had changed. It was no longer just about beating Hayes. It was about making the right alliances and ensuring the survival of her company. The right deal with Winters could tip the scales in their favor, but if she made one wrong move, everything could fall apart. A few days later, Clara and Elon met with Charlotte again, this time at her sleek, high-rise office in downtown San Francisco. The city sprawled out below them, a maze of buildings, lights, and endless possibilities. Clara had always loved this view, but today, it felt different. There was a sense of finality in the air, as though everything they had worked for was hanging by a thread. Charlotte greeted them with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Clara, Elon, it's good to see you both again. Clara returned the smile, but her mind was focused on the task at hand. Charlotte, we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. We're confident that this partnership will benefit both of us in the long run. Charlotte sat back in her chair, fingers steepled in front of her lips. Let's get to the heart of it. I'm not one to waste time, and neither are you. I've reviewed your proposal, and I'll be honest. I'm intrigued. But I need to know that you're serious. This is a big commitment, Clara. I don't invest in just any company, and I don't back anyone who isn't willing to go all in. Clara leaned forward, her gaze steady. I'm ready to go all in. This isn't just a business for me. It's personal. We're facing a battle on all fronts, and I'm not backing down. I'm asking you to invest not just in a company, but in a vision. I want to take down Hayes, and I want to do it with your help. For a long moment, Charlotte didn't say anything. The silence in the room stretched, thick with tension. Clara could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she held her ground. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Finally, Charlotte spoke. I like your conviction, Clara. That's what I look for in an entrepreneur. But conviction alone won't win this battle. You need more than just ambition. You need a clear strategy, a plan that will not only protect what you have, but also give you the upper hand over Hayes. So tell me, what exactly is your plan? Clara took a deep breath and outlined the details of their strategy, how they would leverage Charlotte's investment to acquire the necessary assets to counter Hayes' moves, how they would strengthen their position in the market, and how they would force Hayes into a corner where he wouldn't be able to escape. She spoke with passion, confidence, and clarity, painting a picture of a future where they were the victors, where Hayes was left in the dust, scrambling to catch up. Charlotte listened carefully, her eyes never leaving Clara's. When Clara finished, Charlotte took a moment to process, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. All right, Clara, Charlotte said finally, her voice calm and measured. I'll give you the backing you need. But understand this, if I'm going to invest in this, I need to know that you'll follow through. This won't be easy, and it won't be quick. Hayes is no fool, and he'll fight tooth and nail to maintain control. Are you prepared for that kind of war? Clara didn't hesitate. I've been in battles before, Charlotte, and I've won. I'm ready for whatever it takes. Charlotte studied her for a long time, her eyes sharp and calculating. Finally, she smiled, a rare, genuine smile. Good. I like you, Clara. I think we'll do great things together. With the deal secured, Clara felt a sense of relief wash over her. They had what they needed, a powerful ally in Charlotte Winters, a plan to take on Hayes, and the resources to make it happen. But even with the momentum on their side, Clara knew that this was far from over. The real battle was just beginning. As she left Charlotte's office, Elon by her side, Clara couldn't help but feel the weight of the task ahead. The deal with Charlotte was just one piece of the puzzle, but it was the most important one. Now, with her new ally on board, Clara had the resources and firepower to finally defeat Hayes once and for all. But Clara knew better than to celebrate too soon. Hayes wouldn't go down without a fight, and the war they were about to wage would test everything they had built. But with Charlotte Winters backing them, Clara felt more confident than ever. She turned to Elon as they stepped out onto the street, the evening air cool against her skin. We're not done yet, she said, her voice resolute. We've secured the first victory, but now we finish this. We take Hayes down once and for all. Elon nodded, his expression focused. Let's do it. Clara stood on the balcony of her high-rise office, staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled like stars, but in her mind, the battle lines were drawn in bold strokes of red. She had fought so hard to get to this point, and now the final confrontation with Hayes was at hand. She couldn't afford to lose. The weight of everything, her company, her legacy, and her future, rested on this next move. Beside her, Elon stood silently, observing her as if he could feel the pressure weighing on her. She could sense his presence without having to look at him. His calm energy was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. "You're thinking too much," Elon said, his voice low, but steady. "You're already prepared. You've got Charlotte. You've got your plan. You just need to execute it." Clara sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. It felt like 1,000 voices were echoing in her head, pulling her in every direction. The deal with Charlotte Winters had given them a fighting chance, but she knew that Hayes wasn't going to roll over just because they had a new ally. He was ruthless, calculating, and driven by one thing: power. And if Clara made one misstep, everything would unravel. "You're right," Clara said, her voice calm but firm. "But I can't shake the feeling that this isn't just about business anymore. It's personal. Hayes is trying to tear down everything I've built, everything I've worked for. He's not just trying to defeat me, he's trying to erase me." Elon turned toward her, his eyes meeting hers. "Then let's make sure he knows that's not going to happen. You've built this company from the ground up. You've faced worse. This is just the last step in making sure he never gets the chance to hurt you again." Clara nodded, her resolve hardening. Elon was right. She couldn't let Hayes take away her future. She'd worked too hard, and she was too close now to turn back. This was her moment to seal her victory. The following week, the war between Clara and Hayes reached its apex. Clara's team worked around the clock, orchestrating the final phase of their strategy. They had managed to secure the assets needed to neutralize Hayes' advantage, and now it was time to make their move. The deal with Charlotte Winters was the cornerstone of their offensive, and with her backing, Clara knew they had the leverage they needed to force Hayes into a corner. But Hayes wasn't one to go down quietly. A bombshell dropped one afternoon when Clara's assistant, Lisa, burst into her office. "Clara, you need to see this." Clara immediately straightened, instinctively knowing something was wrong. Lisa handed her a tablet with a news article flashing across the screen. The headline read, "Hayes Corporation makes unprecedented move, acquires key technology from Clara Benton's firm in last-minute deal." Clara's heart sank as she scanned the article. Hayes had managed to outmaneuver them in the final hour. The acquisition was complete, and it wasn't just any piece of technology. It was the one thing that had given her company the edge in the market. With it in his hands, Hayes now held the key to controlling everything. "This can't be happening," Clara muttered, her voice tight with frustration. "How did he do it?" Lisa was visibly shaken. "It looks like Hayes managed to convince some of our top investors to jump ship. He made them an offer they couldn't refuse. This deal came out of nowhere." Clara slammed the tablet down on her desk, anger flaring in her chest. This was supposed to be the endgame. She'd played her cards carefully, but Hayes had outplayed her at the last possible moment. Elon appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "What's going on?" Clara looked up at him, a fire burning in her eyes. "Hayes just pulled the rug out from under us. He's taken the one thing we couldn't afford to lose. It's over." Elon walked into the room, his presence a calming force. "It's not over. Not yet." Clara shook her head, the weight of the situation sinking in. "It is. He's taken everything we've worked for. I don't know how we can recover from this." Elon's voice remained steady, unwavering. "Clara, you've been in worse situations. You always find a way to come out on top. Now isn't the time to throw in the towel. We have one move left." Clara looked up at him, her frustration still evident, but with a flicker of hope in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "We have Charlotte Winters," Elon said, his voice almost a whisper. "If we play this right, we can use the one thing Hayes doesn't have: support. We can turn this into an opportunity, not just a setback. You just need to trust me, and trust Charlotte. In the following days, Clara, Elon, and Abigail worked feverishly behind the scenes, rethinking their strategy. They knew that Hayes was vulnerable. His aggressive tactics had alienated a lot of potential partners, and many in the industry were starting to question his methods. But Clara needed more than just a comeback. She needed to send a clear message to Hayes. This war was far from over. Then, as if fate had decided to intervene, they received a call from Charlotte Winters herself. "I've been following the news," Charlotte said when Clara answered the phone. "You've been dealt a heavy blow. But I'm not one to back down, and I know you're not either. We need to strike now while Hayes is vulnerable." Clara felt a surge of adrenaline. Charlotte was right. They couldn't let Hayes think he had one. "I'm ready," Clara said firmly. "What do we do?" "I've been in touch with several key investors who are interested in backing a strategic counteroffer," Charlotte explained. "We can leverage this moment and turn it into a coup. But we need to move fast, and we need to be precise. The first step is making sure Hayes knows he's not in control anymore." Clara's mind was racing. She had one last shot at this, and she wasn't going to waste it. "Let's do it." That night, the final phase of their strategy was set in motion. With Charlotte's network, they orchestrated a public release that turned the tables on Hayes, highlighting the questionable nature of his acquisition and painting him as a corporate bully who would stop at nothing to crush his competition. The release was timed perfectly, hitting the media just as Hayes prepared for his next big press conference. The fallout was immediate. Investors began pulling out of Hayes' company, publicly distancing themselves from his controversial moves. Clara's counteroffer was suddenly the talk of the town, and what had once seemed like an insurmountable defeat was now beginning to shift in her favor. Hayes' response came the next day, an angry press release accusing Clara of manipulation and deceit. But it was too late. The damage was done, and the tides had turned. As Clara stood in front of her team that evening, she allowed herself a moment of quiet victory. They had done it. They had turned the impossible into something achievable. Hayes had underestimated her, and that was the mistake that would cost him everything. Clara smiled, a sense of relief washing over her. "We've won. This is just the beginning." Elon, standing beside her, nodded. "You did it, Clara. You showed everyone what you're made of." Clara looked out the window at the city below, her thoughts already racing toward the next chapter. Hayes had been defeated, but the future was still full of uncertainty. Yet one thing was clear. She wasn't done yet. The aftermath of the confrontation with Hayes was a whirlwind. The industry buzzed with chatter about the stunning turnaround. Clara Benton, once thought to be on the verge of losing everything, had come out on top. News outlets lauded her resilience, calling her one of the brightest minds in tech today. Charlotte Winters, her powerful ally, stood firmly by her side, providing the support and influence Clara needed to secure her position as a force to be reckoned with. Despite the victory, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the war wasn't truly over. Yes, Hayes had been defeated, his empire cracked and crumbling. But in the world of business, power dynamics were always shifting. New challenges were bound to arise, and she had no illusions that her journey was over. In many ways, this was only the beginning. Clara sat in her office late one evening, watching the city below. The office, once her sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield she had just conquered. She had won, yes, but there was always the risk of someone else rising to take her place. The stakes were always high. Yet, despite the constant uncertainty, Clara had come to understand something important. Success wasn't about the destination. It was about how you faced the challenges along the way. Elon walked into her office, his familiar calm presence grounding her. "You did it, Clara," he said softly, offering a smile. "You turned the tables when it seemed like all was lost." Hayes never saw it coming. Clara turned to him, a grateful but pensive expression on her face. "It wasn't just me. It was everyone. The team, Charlotte, you. I couldn't have done it without all of you." Elon's smile deepened. "You've always had the vision, Clara. We just helped you make it a reality." Clara nodded, then glanced back at the view. "I've been thinking a lot. About everything. The pressure, the battles, the triumphs. There's always something new around the corner. I can't help but wonder if I'll ever feel like I've truly won." Elon moved to the window beside her. "You already have. It's not about one victory, Clara. It's about finding balance. You've built something incredible. You've fought and won the hardest battles. Now it's time to focus on what's next. Clara looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent so much time fighting for survival, for success, for power. But what did she want beyond all of that? It was a question she hadn't taken the time to ask herself until now. Success, power, and influence. Those things were important, but they didn't define her. What truly mattered was the purpose she had discovered along the way, the lives she had touched, the change she had made, the legacy she would leave behind. I think you're right, Clara said after a moment of silence. I've been so focused on winning that I forgot to stop and look at what I've already built. Maybe it's time to lead in a different way, not just in business, but in how I make an impact on the world. Elon smiled, the weight of their shared journey reflected in his eyes. That's the next chapter, Clara, and I think you'll write it better than anyone. A few weeks later, Clara found herself in a new chapter of her life, one that felt both familiar and entirely foreign. The company was thriving, but now Clara's focus was on creating something bigger. She had a responsibility not just to her investors and partners, but to the world. The industry had already seen what she was capable of. Now it was time to show them what she could do with the power of innovation and vision. She gathered her team together for a pivotal meeting, one that marked the beginning of her next mission. I'm done fighting for survival, Clara began, her voice firm but full of purpose. It's time to lead with intention. We're going to shift our focus, more than just technology, more than just business. We're going to make a difference. We're going to create something that lasts. The room was filled with murmurs of excitement. Clara had earned their trust, and now they were ready to follow her into uncharted territory. We're going to be leaders in sustainability, Clara continued. We'll create products and services that not only disrupt the market, but make the world better. Our next step is about more than profits. It's about changing lives. Her team erupted into applause, their enthusiasm palpable. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt truly at peace with the direction her life was taking. She was no longer just a businesswoman out for power. She was a visionary, and she had the resources, the team, and the ambition to change the world in ways people had never imagined. As Clara stepped onto the stage at a global tech conference months later, she felt the weight of the moment. The audience was packed with industry leaders, investors, and innovators eager to hear what the brilliant Clara Benton had to say next. She took a deep breath and smiled, her confidence clear. Today isn't just about the future of technology, she said, her voice ringing through the room. It's about the future of all of us. We're standing on the precipice of a new era, an era where success isn't defined by profits or power, but by the positive impact we have on the world. The audience fell silent, hanging on every word. Together, we have the power to create not just products, but solutions that solve real-world problems. We have the ability to change lives, to protect the planet, and to leave a lasting legacy. And that's what we're going to do. Together, we're going to change the world. As Clara finished her speech, the room erupted in applause. She stood tall, knowing that she had truly found her purpose. The battle with Hayes had been fierce, but it had led her to this moment, a moment where she could finally stop looking over her shoulder and start moving forward with the full weight of her vision behind her. Later that night, Clara sat quietly at her desk, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The twists and turns, the victories and defeats, they had all led to this. She had fought for her company, her future, and her legacy. But now, she was fighting for something much bigger than herself. Her phone buzzed with a message from Elon. Couldn't be prouder of you, Clara. This is just the beginning. Clara smiled as she typed her response. I know, and it's going to be incredible. As she looked out over the city one last time that night, Clara knew that her true victory had only just begun. She had not only built a company, she had built a movement. The world was changing, and Clara Benton was at the forefront of it all. The war with Hayes was over, but the journey to create a lasting legacy had only just begun. Clara Benton's journey has come full circle. She faced impossible odds, overcame fierce challenges, and emerged victorious. But her true legacy isn't just in the battles she won. It's in the way she chose to lead the future. With a new mission, a new vision, and a renewed sense of purpose, Clara is ready to leave a mark on the world that will last for generations. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?